blustery showers and an increased wind as we go into the afternoon as well. That wind particularly gusty around hills and coasts, making it feel cold, 4 to 7 degrees in the north, whilst in the south it's milder, 11 to 12 Celsius. But under any clear skies through the evening, actually, temperatures will fall away. Meanwhile, further north, the winds pick up further and we'll see quite a number of showers arriving, along with gale-force winds, especially around the north coast of Scotland, with 60, 70, perhaps even higher mile-per-hour wind gusts. It's going to be cold as well, with snow falling above 400 or 500 metres across central Scotland and 2 to 3 Celsius in the north. Frost largely prevented because the wind's stirring the air up, and further south, well, it will be a fresh start, but plenty of bright spells around first thing in the south, whilst an area of cloud tends to drift south through the day, and that cloud will introduce some rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northwest England. Meanwhile, the wind does eventually ease across northern Scotland, and the showers also become fewer further between by the afternoon. Some sunshine in the northeast of Scotland, otherwise a lot of cloud as we end Wednesday, and that cloud tending to push rain into central and western Scotland as well as parts of northern England Wednesday evening. Further south, some clear spells, and it stays mostly dry through the Friday and weekend period in the south. It's also going to turn much milder.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome along, wonderful people. You're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. Now, coming up, it is 3 years to the day since the UK officially left the EU. Our Brexit-backing Prime Minister said Britain has taken huge strides towards taking advantage of our independence, but many feel we've never had a proper Brexit. A poll published by Ipsos has found 45% of people think Brexit is going worse than they expected, up sharply from 28% in June 2021, including just over 1 in 4 of those who actually voted to leave back in that 2016 referendum. Feels like a lifetime ago that now, doesn't it? The whole point of Brexit was to take back control of our laws, our borders and our money. And throughout this show, I will be taking a deep dive into Brexit Britain to see how we're doing on those key issues, as well as looking at the State of the Union. But it's not all Brexit though, don't worry, ladies and gents. As we'll also reflect more on the uncertainty when it comes to our healthcare system, with ambulance workers set to walk out yet again. Also consultants. Has anyone got massive sympathy for consultants walking out? I thought they were on an absolute wedge. And get a load of this, teachers are reportedly not going to tell their own schools if they're striking tomorrow, which means parents with actual jobs, all like, I don't know, nurses, people like that, people who save lives, they will turn up at the school gates tomorrow and not know if their kid will be allowed in. Shocking stuff. Get in touch with your thoughts, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Questions for you today, ladies and gents. What's your top priority now for Brexit Britain? I want to know what's top of your list. And what would you say to people who still want a second referendum? gbviews at gbnews.uk. Now, though, it's your headlines.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 3.
The Foreign Secretary has admitted the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. James Cleverly was responding to a question in the House of Commons over the impact of Brexit. His comment comes a day after the Prime Minister said Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU 3 years ago. That's despite a recent poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. Speaking to GB News, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months. So it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided jolly nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year. So it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
The UK's economy, meanwhile, is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023 rather than grow slightly, as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions such as high inflation. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the state of the UK economy proves the IMF's predictions are right.
Well, if we don't want to look at the predictions, let's look at the facts of what's happened in terms of UK growth. The average growth for the UK economy has been just 2/3 under the Conservatives that it was under the last Labour government, and the UK is now the only major economy to be smaller today than it was before the COVID pandemic hit. That isn't predictions about what is to come, that is the state of the UK economy after 13 years of Conservative government.
UK shoppers are facing the sharpest increase in grocery bills on record after food price inflation rose to a new high. According to market researcher Kantar, grocery price inflation was up 16.7% year on year, with prices rising fastest in products like milk, eggs and dog food. The researcher also warned that households now face an extra £788 on their annual shopping bill due to rising costs. Thousands of Unison ambulance workers across 5 services in England will strike on the 10th of February in a long-running dispute over pay and staffing. It comes as NHS consultants in England announced today they'll hold an indicative ballot on taking industrial action. The British Medical Association says although it's not a formal ballot, it represents a significant escalation towards one. The union says consultants are leaving the profession or cutting their hours due to significant pay cuts and unfair pension rules. Police forces have apologised to relatives of the victims of the Hillsborough disaster for what they described as profound failings. The apology comes as a response to a report published in 2017 that looked into the experiences of the Hillsborough families. Police chiefs have promised a cultural change almost 34 years on from the disaster. 97 football fans died as a result of a crush at a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest on April the 15th in 1989. An inquest jury ruled in 2016 that they were unlawfully killed amid a number of police errors. A £10,000 reward is being offered in the hunt for Constance Martin and her newborn baby. Police believe the 35-year-old is sleeping rough along with her child and partner Mark Gordon, who is a convicted sex offender. The family were last seen in East Sussex on January the 8th. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister says Ukraine will receive 120 to 140 Western tanks in a first wave of deliveries from a coalition of 12 countries. Meanwhile, footage has been released of Ukrainian soldiers being trained on how to use Leopard 2 battle tanks in Poland. They've been supplied by Germany to help support Ukraine in its ongoing war with Russia. It's expected to take up to 5 weeks before the crews are ready to use the vehicles in battle. The Princess of Wales says it's essential to know what's needed to help the future generation become happy, healthy adults. Launching her new early years campaign, Shaping Us, the princess says she hopes to help people understand how early childhood affects later life and adulthood. Vanity Fair royal editor and author Katie Nicholl says Kate's hoping her lifetime project becomes part of the national conversation.
I think it's significant that she's used her first sort of big moment as the Princess of Wales to launch this long-term campaign that is going to be screened in cinemas. You're going to see it on billboards. We're all going to be talking about this, she hopes, in the same way that we've all started talking about mental health.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, back to Patrick.
All right, then, let's get stuck straight in, shall we? Because today marks 3 years since Brexit Day. So this calls for a big Brexit special. There is a Brexit angle to almost every major national news story, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take you back to the initial wave of tub-thumping patriotic optimism, look at the reasons behind why Britain voted to leave the European Union, what people hope Brexit would look like, and assess where we are today. How's the economy doing? Been battered by COVID and the war in Ukraine. The latest IMF figures are all about Britain in recession, but we'll be giving you some reasons to be optimistic. It's not all doom and gloom. Taking full control of our laws was another priority. Could pulling out of the ECHR help sort both of those things out? On a similar note, immigration was a key factor in the Brexit vote, yet we're seeing record levels of both legal and illegal immigration. Are there people living their post-Brexit lives full of regret, whether they voted to leave or remain? Basically, I'm asking whether or not you'd vote for Brexit again if indeed you did the first time round. And what is the state of the Union post-Brexit? We'll be going all over the UK with our team of excellent video journalists to see what the Scots, the Welsh and, of course, the fair people of Northern Ireland have to say about the whole thing. But, of course, we are nothing without you, the people, with the People's Channel. So we'll be getting GB News viewers and listeners on the airways, live on the telly, to tell us what they wanted from Brexit and talk about what they've actually got. Brexit was about taking control of our borders, our laws and our money. So 3 years on, join me as we take a deep dive into Brexit Britain. Let's now speak to Brexiteer Mark Francois. What a way to kickstart the show, ladies and gents. Big Brexiteer himself, the Conservative MP for Raleigh and Wickford. Mark, would you vote for Brexit again?
I absolutely would.
Why?
I could, if you want a few advantages, I'm just happy to reel some off very quickly.
Rattle them off, and I'll make a note for when we get the Ramonas on later.
Yeah, okay, right. Firstly, free from EU medical bureaucracy, we achieved one of the fastest vaccine rollouts in the world. Remember, the first jab in the world was administered in Britain. Secondly, out of the embrace of ever closer union, we've been able to pursue a truly independent foreign policy. That means we've been able to really lead the West in terms of rallying support for Ukraine. Thirdly, we've got an independent trade policy, which you can't have within the EU. 70 trade deals, including with Australia and New Zealand, negotiating more with countries around the world, including India and Mexico. And of course, we've got the AUKUS security deal to go with that as well. Fourth, we're out of the highly bureaucratic common agricultural policy and the fisheries policy, which often those
all right, Mark, I'm going to cut in here, Mark, just quickly, and just say, OK, a lot of people, though, will say, well, hang on a minute, farmers, they're up in arms, they're saying that, you know, but they're worse off as a result of Brexit.
No, we've changed the way we support farmers. We now no longer do it through a highly complex CAP and talk many farmers about how difficult it was to get money out of rural payments agency and then send well back. We're still going to give money, but that's for environmental benefits, not because of the CAP.
All right. Mark, I tell you what, potentially the EU has got involved and damaged your microphone. You need to get a microphone that's made in Britain. We're going to try and fix it for a second. You did sound a little bit like you're underwater there, but we'll come back to you, Mark. Please stay where you are, and we will get you... We'll get you sorted out. Now, OK, it's all right, actually, because a recent poll by Unheard suggests that Boston in Lincolnshire remains the only constituency in the UK that does not think it was wrong to leave the EU. I'm not sure I quite believe that poll, but anyway, we'll run with it. With me now is Councillor Paul Skinner, Boston Borough Council leader from the only constituency, supposedly, that does not think it was a mistake to leave the EU. I'm assuming you don't think it was a mistake to leave the EU?
No, I don't think it was a mistake.
Good. Why not?
Well, there's a world of opportunity out there, and I'm afraid global events have actually caused probably a bit of a hiccup, to say the least. The war in the Ukraine has caused us problems with inflation and the price of diesel, which costs every product that we have.
I get that. I'm just going to cut in and just ask, do you think that we absolutely made a Horlicks of it? I nearly said something else then. That would have been an error, wouldn't it, of it? By putting Theresa May in charge of it right at the beginning. Were we doomed to failure from the start? We had a lady there, bless her, who didn't believe in it.
I don't think that would matter. The people have voted to leave, and I think we should be staying by a decision. There's lots of things come along, and you know, in our area, people are still believing that it was a good decision, and I certainly think it was as well.
Some people will say, well, we've never really had a proper Brexit, and I get this all the time in the inbox. I'm going to go into that inbox in a second, by the way, ladies and gents, gbviews@gbnews.uk, because one of the big questions I'm asking people today is, yeah, all right, whether or not you vote for Brexit again, but also what should the nation's top priorities be when it comes to Brexit? And from what I can see so far, those priorities are what they were when people voted to leave. Sorting out our borders is top of the issue. We've had record levels of legal and illegal immigration, Paul.
Indeed we have, and areas like my own and the adjoining East Lindsey have had quite a lot of the Home Office set up hotels, which has obviously inflamed people's feelings. The Home Office have not really consulted properly on these things, and they've just set them up. But on the other end, I would imagine they're pretty desperate as well.
OK, all right. So can I ask you, you are a councillor in Boston Borough Council. What benefits has your local area seen from Brexit, or are they all still to come in the sunlit uplands?
I would think that the free trade part of it, yes, there's been some disadvantages, I would think, with the extra paperwork as the EU try and punish us for being not a trading partner. But the thought that we can trade worldwide, I think that's a positive advantage.
OK, all right, fair enough. That's Councillor Paul Skinner there, Boston Borough Council leader from the only constituency that does not think, supposedly, that it was a mistake to leave the European Union. I promise you I'll go into the inbox. I will do shortly. That email address, again, gbviews@gbnews.uk. What's top of your priority list when it comes to Brexit Britain? I can't help but notice that stopping the boats appears to be, although I'm assured that it's in no particular order, bottom of Rishi Sunak's current list of priorities. I suspect you might want to flip that one, ladies and gents. Let me know what you think. I'm also asking what you would say to people who say, look, it's not gone as planned. Let's have a second referendum. I want to hear from you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But let's take a look at the economy now. Is the economy stupid? As ministers have been urged to accept that Brexit has added to the UK's economic woes after the IMF warned the country will be plunged into recession this year. Joining me now, who else, is our economics and business editor. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. How catastrophic for our finances, or otherwise, has Brexit been?
I don't think it's been particularly catastrophic. We haven't been paying massive annual contributions to the European Union every year, have we? And actually, for all the doom and gloom around today from the IMF, you know, everyone gets their forecast wrong. The IMF often does so. We've actually grown at about the same amount as Germany since 2016, even though, because we had a tighter lockdown, our economy contracted more during lockdown. Of course, it hasn't always been plain sailing. Most economists who are pro-Brexit said it would be like a kind of Nike schwuss at the beginning. It would go down a bit because, you know, breaking things up is difficult, and then the economy would grow more strongly. The danger, I think, for people who did back Brexit, and this government, which has obviously backed Brexit in general, though, of course, there's a wide range of opinion in the Tory party, as there is across all parties. The danger is that the public are hearing about the downsides of Brexit with not enough of the upsides implemented in terms of less regulation, more business-friendly policies that the EU wouldn't instinctively follow, but the UK now can.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's people struggling to accept promises now on the never as time passes on. Everyone's got a limit when it comes to that kind of stuff. But one of the reasons why I always love talking to you, Liam, is because you kind of do a healthy dose of realism when it comes to these figures, like the IMF. And it's interesting, I think, to compare us to other nations. I mean, we're not doing that badly, are we, really?
We're not. You know, I used to work at the International Monetary Fund. I know what goes into these estimates. I think there's a lot of good people working there, though they are under quite a lot of political pressure to come up with certain, outcomes. All big institutions where you've got economists basically guessing what's going to happen, they come under pressure. And it is guesswork, however many econometric computer models you've got. But just before that Brexit referendum in the spring of 2016, before the referendum in June, the IMF said that even voting to leave, the Treasury said the same thing, would lead to, a huge crash, a big recession. It never happened. So forecasts aren't destiny. And also, we haven't heard so much today about the fact that the IMF confirmed that in 2022, the year just passed, revised numbers show that the British economy actually grew far faster than much of the rest of the G7. We grew last year at 4.1%, the Eurozone average was 3.5%, US 2%, Italy 3.9%, France 2.6%. So these things come and go. I think it is the case that we are suffering in particular, as indeed the IMF said today in its World Economic Outlook, from rising taxes. As we go into a slowdown, we're putting taxes up. That's a bit strange compared to the rest of the world. And also, Patrick, some of the things we've discussed a lot over recent months, the fact we haven't got enough gas storage, our energy security is a bit squiffy. That's been exposed by the war in Ukraine, squiffy there being a technical economics term.
I did wonder,
But it all adds up to the fact that households and our companies are paying more for their energy than almost any other mainstream economy in Europe. And that, of course, will slow down growth. Plus the fact that a lot of our workforce haven't come back to work since lockdown. And all these things are slowing things down. So we're going to need a lot of British innovation and entrepreneurial skill to get the economy moving again.
OK, just very quickly, Liam, could the headline have been about Britain growing 4.1% compared to the EU's 3.5%, and some people have chosen to focus on the negative?
I think that's what a lot of journalists do, don't they? Particularly when it comes to Brexit. Look, Brexit hasn't been plain sailing by any means. There's an awful lot of things that should have happened that haven't happened, and it will be, a pretty tough road ahead. But I do think almost everybody is focused on the negatives from this IMF report rather than the positives.
Liam, thank you as ever, mate. Cheers. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor with On the Money. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, a top legal commentator has told GB News that he believes it's highly unlikely the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch the treaty. Those in favour of withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights believe that Brexit cannot be fully realised while the UK remains in the ECHR. Essentially, it hits two Brexit birds in one stone, this next story, because it talks about immigration, legal and illegal, and, of course, taking back control of our laws. So I'll have the absolute lot of it after your weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Increasingly windy for many of us through the rest of the day, but particularly in the north, where there are also blustery showers. Clear spells in the south. We've seen a cold front move through here as a weakening feature. Now that cloud is clearing, sunshine is returning across England and Wales. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, tightly packed isobars, a northwesterly breeze bringing chilly air and frequent showers. Now those showers are falling as snow above 400 or 500 metres over central Scotland. But it's the wind that is the main concern as we head into the night time, with gales widely across northern Scotland and for some exposed coasts of northern Scotland, especially around Orkney, Lewis, the North Mainland, 60, 70, perhaps 80 mile per hour in places. That could cause disruption. And it's going to be a cold night, 3 or 4 Celsius in the north, 5 to 7 further south. Although in the south, it'll be a bright start to Wednesday, having been, well, a mixture of clear spells and cloud overnight. Some sunshine, the best of which will be in the south, remaining into the afternoon. Also brightening up in the north of Scotland, the wind and the showery activity easing in between an area of cloud and some outbreaks of rain for Northern Ireland, west and southwest Scotland and northern England. A chilly day again in the north, 7 or 8 Celsius, further south 9 to 11 degrees, but the wind becoming less of an issue later Wednesday, that wind tending to become lighter. Although it will turn wetter once again across the northern half of the UK, some steady rain into Scotland and northern England overnight. Northern Ireland seeing a lot of cloud and a few spots of rain. Clouds thickening further south as well, and so a frost-free night for the vast majority, although a touch of frost is possible in the far north ahead of the rain. Then that rain lingers across much of Scotland through Thursday, a damp day to come. The heaviest rain, though, over Western Hills. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud cover, I think, on Thursday. Some light rain over Western Hills further south as well, but it is turning much milder. Temperatures up into the double figures widely.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. The inbox has kicked off. It's a bit of a Brexit special today. It's not the only story in town, but 3 years since we properly left the EU. GB views at gbnews.uk. Patrick, I would vote Brexit again. Yes, yes, yes. That's from Lynn. And she says, those that say Brexit isn't working, what do they expect? We've had a pandemic. That flattened our trajectory. We've also had Gary on, who says Brexit would have been fine if we'd not had the particular crop of politicians that we had in charge at the time. Talking of politicians, the Foreign Secretary says it would be a fair assessment to suggest that the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. James Cleverly was responding to SNP MP Richard Thomas, who questioned him in the House of Commons over the impact of Brexit exactly 3 years since the UK's withdrawal. One of the big sticking points has been the government and the European Commission being locked in talks to resolve the dispute over post-Brexit Northern Ireland trade arrangements after the last few months. Now, there's also been problems in Scotland, of course, with Holyrood's governing party suggesting Scottish independence is the only way to escape what they're calling the unmitigated disaster of Brexit. I saw a line earlier on, which I think is classic spin from a chap called Alan Smith, who's an MP up there. Interesting, he's usually got rather a lot to say for himself, refused to answer any questions, of course, on the gender madness that's taking place up there. But independence in Europe is now the Scottish line. Independence in Europe. How does that quite work? But anyway, we'll let them pick the bones out of that themselves. Joining me now is our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, and our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Doogie, I will go to you first. Northern Ireland, it doesn't quite look like the sunlit uplands at the minute. We'll see what's going on behind you. But what's the Brexit latest where you are?
Well, we are still in Brexit purgatory, for want of a better explanation to anything. We neither exited or stayed. In fact, we lost our MEPs in Northern Ireland and are now caught by European regulations and legalities and have no MEPs or democracy to say what can be done there. To get goods in and out of Northern Ireland, that's why I'm at the docks here. Most of these goods coming in and out, some of them coming from the UK mainland, they have to put in place TSS forms, their trader support services, and in 24 months that cost £318 million. That's £318 million to the British taxpayer. And of course, £318 million, take that by the hour, that's £18,000 an hour. That's equivalent to 7,300 nurses in and around the UK, and that's in order that UK goods can travel through the UK. That in itself, people would never have believed that if you said that was going to happen when Brexit happened. And of course, the protocol is here to protect the integrity of the single market and those in the single market, and that includes the Republic of Ireland. So those that said that the Brexit was going to work very well and the protocol was going to work in that place, well, Northern Ireland has went into a technical recession. It's the first area of the UK to do that. 72% of the jobs in Northern Ireland are funded by the public sector, so it should not actually be in a recession. Then there was problems with prescription drugs, and those fall very much now into the veterinary side of things as well. We're finding it very hard to keep in touch with the United Kingdom with those medications, and of course that's coming up in the House of Lords. So Brexit for Northern Ireland hasn't worked, and it's not going to work, and those protocol talks that are coming up, of course, aren't separating Northern Ireland from the rest of Europe economically, and where you have economic integration, you will have political integration.
Well, that's exactly that, Doogie, isn't it, when it comes to the economic integration, and many people, I think in plenty of cases, rightly so, feeling as though Northern Ireland was just siphoned off as part of that deal and forgotten about. Tony, I'm going to go north of the border now. Going up north, time to put your big coats on. Tony Maguire there in Scotland. Scotland did vote to remain, OK, and I think they probably still want to, don't they? But they want to rejoin the European Union as well as independence. What's the Scottish position? I'm a bit confused these days with Sturgeon.
Pick one, I think, is the question. The wall is covered from things being thrown at it to see what sticks this week. Certainly the latest that we saw in an interview with Angus Robertson in Holyrood magazine, his view, along with the SNP government, is to say that if we go independent, then we don't need to have yet another referendum to join the EU. Now, whether or not that things will work out that way, unfortunately for the SNP government, things have a habit of not quite working out the way that they were intended. Certainly today, here at Holyrood, I've been trying to get a feel from all of Scotland's main political parties as to what, where they think they are 3 years later. And surprisingly, Anna Sarwar of the Scottish Labour group, he's blaming the Conservatives down in Westminster. The SNP and the Greens are still calling Brexit an abject failure. And then the Liberal Democrats, Willie Rennie, released a statement today saying that he thinks that we all need to come together for a pragmatic solution. We are where we are. One person I did get a chance to sit down today with was Jamie Green of the Scottish Conservative Party. Let's hear what he had to say.
I don't believe that the Brexit vote has strengthened the case for independence. In fact, the day after that vote, the SNP were renouncing the result and calling for another rerun of the last referendum they lost in 2014. They've never really been very good at respecting the outcomes of referendums in Scotland. And I'm afraid to say that I think people have looked on at Brexit and are now thinking, do we really want to go through all of that again? Do we want to divide our country? Do we want to separate communities and families? I think the SNP need to get back to the day job. They love the fact that Brexit and all these constitutional issues are simply smokescreens for their failings in government.
Look, both of you, thank you very, very much. Great to hit two parts of the UK there. Our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie BTU, does look as though he's about to get run over by a truck at any minute, so I hope you get to safety, Doogie. And our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, as well. Thank you both very, very much. Hopefully, at some point in the show, we're going to go to Wales as well. Wales, I absolutely loved that. Wales voted, I think I'm right in saying, the highest proportion of Leave votes for any part of the UK, but had received more money in EU subsidies. You love to see it. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, a top legal commentator has told GB News that he believes it's highly unlikely the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch the treaty. Basically, one of the other, if not, frankly, the top element of a lot of people wanting to leave the European Union was to take back control of our borders and then our laws. And this hits both of those topics. The European Convention on Human Rights is something that maybe we should be getting out of. What do you make of all of that? And are unions taking it too far? Parents wait to find out whether or not their children's school will actually be open tomorrow. Teachers are set to walk out in a dispute over pay, but they're not doing ordinary people with ordinary jobs the courtesy of telling them whether or not they need to arrange childcare. Who'd have thunk it? Now, though, it's your headlines.
Hello, it's 3:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has admitted that the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. His comment comes a day after the Prime Minister says Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU 3 years ago. That's despite a recent poll suggesting that 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. Speaking to GB News, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months. So it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided jolly nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year. So it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
The UK economy, meanwhile, is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year. The International Monetary Fund has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% in 2023, rather than grow slightly, as previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions, such as high inflation. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the state of the economy proves the IMF's predictions are right.
Can he explain why the UK is still the only G7 economy that is smaller now than it was before the pandemic? Why is the UK the only G7 economy with its growth forecast downgraded this year? Why are we at the bottom of the league table both this year and next year too? And can the Minister answer this? Why should anyone trust the Conservatives with the economy ever again?
Police forces have apologised to relatives of the victims of the Hillsborough disaster for what they described as profound failings. The apology is a response to a report published in 2017 that looked into the experiences of the Hillsborough families. A cultural change has been promised after almost 34 years on from the disaster. 97 football fans died as a result of a crush at a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest in 1989. An inquest jury ruled in 2016 they were unlawfully killed amid a number of police errors. Lancashire police searching for a missing woman are appealing for a potential key witness to come forward. 45-year-old Nicola Bully was last seen next to the River Wyre on Friday. She was walking her dog. Police say they're keen to find a man who was walking a small, white, fluffy dog in the area around the time Nicola disappeared. He's described as around 70 years old and 6 foot tall. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV
Surprised
with me this
you
morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the 3-year anniversary marking the UK's exit from the European Union. Colin said, I voted to leave in 2016 and would do it again, even if there was a referendum every single year. The problem is the UK is there is too many civil servants, well, maybe not for much longer, actually, because I think 100,000 of them are on strike tomorrow, but MPs and the media working against the UK's decision to leave. And that was emphasised, I think, a little bit by the IMF statement earlier on today, Colin, which appeared to paint a picture of doom and gloom and, horrible post-Brexit Britain being in massive recession and economic nightmare, etc. Did also, just lower down, include the fact that our economy as a whole has grown GDP has grown 4.1% compared to 3.5% in the EU. That was, of course, left out of there rather conveniently, wasn't it, a little bit? And as well, I can't help but notice that they're saying, well, what the UK needs to do is we need to move away from this high-tax, low-growth economy that we've got at the minute. Well, didn't we have a Prime Minister who was outlasted by a lettuce who wanted to do exactly the same thing? It doesn't quite make sense to me. Laura says, leaving the EU was the best decision this country has made. We're currently in the process of taking back control of our own laws, and it's only up from here. Look, I obviously voted for Brexit. Everyone knows that who watches this programme. However, I will just push back on that slightly, which is, for how long can we be in the process of doing stuff? OK? I wanted to see action. I wanted to see much quicker action and much firmer action. I wanted to rip the Band-Aid off and be done with it, OK? Short, sharp, initial cut and a bit of pain, and then after that, you're away. Yes, I know we were stifled by the coronavirus crisis. I don't really buy the fact that we've been massively stifled by the war in Ukraine, because we'll always find something to hold us back, won't we? But I want to see things done rather sharpish, and I think it's absolutely unforgivable that here we are, 3 years on from our quotes-unquote proper Brexit, and we've got record levels of both legal and illegal immigration. Surely we could have done something about at least one of those two things. But anyway, Jim says, I'm an old-age pensioner, all right, Jim, and I voted to leave the European Union. If another referendum were to be held today, I'm afraid to say I would probably choose to rejoin. Interesting. This country has only got worse since Brexit, and I'm struggling to see any other way out. Jim, sorry to hear that things have got worse for you. I can understand what you're saying completely. Jim, one thing that I will say, though, is the absolute disdain that, you said you're an old age pensioner, so the elderly, I hope you don't mind me saying, the elderly were treated with by a lot of the younger Ramona lot who were saying, well, we'll just wait for this lot to shuffle off, will we, and then we'll have another referendum. Like your view, Jim, didn't matter at all, despite the fact that you'd lived in this country your entire life, paid your taxes your entire life, and all the young people thought they knew better. Although, Jim, maybe you now are admitting that they did. I don't know, you said you'd vote for Remain given the chance again. I want to know, though, from you at home, what your top priority is for Brexit Britain now. If we were just starting again, what would it be? And what would you say to people who want a second referendum? GBviews at gbnews.uk. But this is a big one for us because, look, top of most people's lists, I think, was immigration, OK, when they voted for Brexit, and also taking control of our laws. And this one really hits both of those topics. A top legal commentator has told GB News that he thinks it's unlikely the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch the treaty. Those in favour of withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights say it blocks key UK legislation, such as a more robust policy towards our Channel migrants. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has been taking a look at what leaving the ECHR could mean.
In recent days, hundreds of people have arrived in UK waters on small boats, as Home Office officials quietly plan for the possibility that up to twice the 45,000 who crossed last year could come in the year ahead. That thought, deeply unpalatable for many, is fueling growing calls for the UK to withdraw from a human rights treaty that critics believe is hampering efforts to introduce a more assertive immigration policy. Introduced in the years after World War II, the European Convention on Human Rights was drawn up by the initial members of the then fledgling Council on Europe. It offered key protections to prevent those member governments abusing the fundamental rights of their people. But critics say there is no need for the UK to still be tied to such a treaty, that it's ludicrous judges in a European court can make rulings against British government policy post-Brexit. They cite the recent decision by the court in Strasbourg to block a Home Office flight bound for Rwanda as part of a deal struck with the African nation to process asylum seekers there.
He's absolutely right. Can I thank him for raising this? It's critically important.
But despite its many critics and indications by Justice Secretary Dominic Raab that he would be willing to consider it, seasoned legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg thinks it's highly unlikely the UK will ditch the treaty.
This doesn't seem remotely likely. It was something that Dominic Raab floated towards the end of last year. It's not been picked up by anybody else. It's certainly not part of the bill that's before Parliament, and that bill itself seems to be going nowhere. It was published last summer, but hasn't yet had its first main debate, its second reading debate, as it's called, in the House of Commons.
The ECHR's critics believe that British Bill of Rights legislation, still working its way through Parliament, could be turbocharged to take over from the European Treaty. There's no doubt it would be complex, though, as the ECHR is woven into the very fabric of UK human rights laws. And there's another major issue at play here. Despite the imperative to deal more robustly with the likes of the small boat crisis, the government is proud of the UK's record on human rights. Pulling out of the treaty would be seen by many as a major blow to Britain's long-held position as a champion of human rights on the international stage. Ditching the ECHR would put the UK in the same club as the only other two European countries not signed up to the treaty, Belarus and Russia. Mark White, GB News.
OK, well, understandably, this is a massive topic for you, like John, who says what's top of his list of Brexit priorities is immigration, immigration, immigration. And I'm joined now by the man you were hearing over the top of that wonderful package there. It's Mark White, our Home and Security editor. Mark, thank you very much. Now, I understand that we would be, if we pulled out the ECHR, in the same club as Belarus and Russia. But there is a fatal flaw in people who say that's a bad thing, and that is that we're not Belarus and Russia.
Well, this is it, yes. I mean, the UK over many years has built a reputation as being a champion of human rights right around the world. Those in charge, of course, our leading politicians, cherish that particular status within the world. They would not necessarily like to see us pull out of a treaty that is important for underpinning those basic fundamental human rights. But you're right, those who would like to see us exit this treaty say there is no need for the UK to have it, that all of those protections can be enshrined, and indeed they are enshrined within our law anyway, and that people's fundamental liberties absolutely would be protected. But what it would do, coming out of the ECHR, they argue, is stop European courts in the likes of Strasbourg from blocking key legislation that's so important to the government, legislation like putting people on a plane towards Rwanda.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just having a look at the composition of the ECHR now, and I find it absolutely infuriating that we have judges from Slovenia, Luxembourg, places like this, who are able to tell us that we cannot put some people who we've deemed to not want in this country on a plane and get that plane to take off to Rwanda.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly the argument you're putting across, that critics of the ECHR say is one of the fundamental reasons why they want to come out of this treaty and just make our own way in the world, knowing confidently that we can also protect the fundamental rights of individuals in our nation. But will the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Justice Secretary, despite saying publicly that they would consider, if they had to, pulling out of the ECHR, will they actually do it? There's nothing to suggest that actually there's any real serious intention to do that. And that's what Joshua Rosenberg, clearly a seasoned commentator in these issues, reads into it. There's nothing happening in Parliament at the moment. We've got the so-called British Bill of Rights that's very slowly working its way through Parliament, but that's not been updated in any way to take in some of the ECHR's fundamental principles, and it would have to.
Well, considering something and doing something are two very, very different things. You know, I'm considering going back on a diet, but we both know it's not going to happen, right? So, you know, that's the reality of the... I'll tell you right now, it absolutely won't. But when it comes to the state of play regarding illegal immigration, a lot of people, I would say for most people who voted Brexit, immigration, specifically illegal immigration, I could be wrong about this, it's anecdotal, was top of the list. And, well, what we've seen is record levels of both legal and illegal immigration, haven't we?
Yeah, it was very high up there on the list of priorities that the public had. And that's why, of course, you now have a situation where with over 46,000 people who arrived across the English Channel last year, you have the Prime Minister handling the small boats crisis as one of his government's top priorities. But really, you know, as we argue about whether we come out of the ECHR or not, you've got a situation now where the government has said it won't, despite getting a ruling from the High Court saying that the Rwanda policy was legal, it won't put anyone on a flight to Rwanda until all of the legal process has been completed in all of the courts. So it's currently going to the Court of Appeal. After that, if it's found in favour of the government again, the government, we understand, still won't put people on a flight to Rwanda because of the potential that it then goes to the Supreme Court. So what we're looking at with that particular issue is many, many months, potentially into next year, before there's any kind of conclusion to that. Yeah. And then, of course, in the year ahead, if the weather's good, we could have many more than arrived last year, this year.
And you brought us that wonderful story yesterday. Well, wonderful, I'm stretching it a bit there, but the story anyway, informative, I should have said, about the amount of pocket money, essentially, this country is giving out to people who are currently in our asylum seeker hotels, channel migrants, etc. Well, if the number of those people doubles in a year, so does that, presumably. Mark, thank you very much. Mark White, our Home and Security editor. Now, let's take a look at another big story this afternoon. Tomorrow will be the biggest day of industrial action in more than a decade as hundreds of thousands of workers walk out in their separate bids for better pay, jobs and conditions. Mostly pay, though, isn't it? Anyway, school staff will be leaving classrooms empty and taking to the picket lines after yesterday's last-ditch talks ended without a resolution. I, for one, will be looking for any spelling mistakes on those picket line placards. As it stands, the government is holding firm on its position that the UK cannot afford to give in to the demands of striking workers. But the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union has defended teachers, not giving head teachers a warning of their intentions to strike. They're saying it's very appropriate for the plans not to be disclosed. I think it's an absolute disgrace. Joining me now is the Deputy Leader of UKIP and parent, Rebecca Jane, and Socialist Party industrial organiser and trade unionist, it's Rob Williams. Thank you very, very much. Rob, how on earth can teachers say they're not going to give any notice whatsoever? Parents have got jobs. Rob, they've got jobs and they're going to be dropping their kids off at school and then they haven't got a chance to arrange childcare now because of these nasty teachers.
Well, first of all, the teachers do give notice. They give 2 weeks' notice because that's what the law says. You have to give a fortnight's notice to take strike action, and that's what they've done. I mean, by the way, I don't know if you know, Patrick, but the Head Teachers Union, they support strike action. Actually, head teachers have got over the mandate in Wales. So, this is education staff. Don't forget, 70,000 university staff are on strike tomorrow. 500,000 workers are on strike tomorrow. Why are they on strike? Because the cost of living squeeze, because of staff shortages, the pressure on teachers. By the way, I'm not only a parent, I'm a grandparent. And I support those workers taking action because they're fighting for kids' education.
OK, all right. I'm gonna let Rebecca Jane do the heavy lifting on that one. Rebecca, you turn up at the school gates tomorrow and you find out that the gates are locked. What do?
Well, I'm not happy, but I'm generally not very happy with all the strikes that are going on because they're penalising the people that can't really do anything about it, and especially the coordinated strikes that are currently obviously underway. You're hitting the wrong places. And then the other part of this is that, like you've touched on, Patrick, they're talking about pay when they're saying that they want to improve the situation. How is paying these people more going to actually improve the situation? We need to be reinvesting down at the bottom of the chain, not paying who we've got already more. So I'm not happy. We have to take it on the chin, but we need to start finding better and more effective ways of doing this.
Yeah, indeed. And Rob, I read with some interest yesterday, actually, that apparently the average wage of a teacher is 42 grand a year. They were offered 5% the year before that. The fact is that when they go on strike tomorrow, there will be loads of parents at the school gates with kids, and those parents are on less money than the people who are striking. How do you figure that one out?
Well, first of all, obviously, not all teachers are anything remotely like that. But the point is that the parents who would take those kids to school tomorrow, or rather, many of them will be supporting workers taking action because they are workers themselves. Inflation is over 13%. Workers are having massive pay cuts. And by the way,
is there data to support that, Rob? Have we got? Because we keep hearing. Because what I hear, no, but seriously, Rob, what I hear is people on picket lines, Rob, going, judging their support by how many people toot their horn as they drive past, which does not equate to mass public support, frankly. Rebecca, I'll throw it back your way. Do you think that they should be banned from striking, these teachers? Because if you were a parent and you were a nurse and you couldn't go to work because you had to look after your little one, I mean, people might die.
I understand the point that you're making, and I think when human life comes into question, I don't think that strikes should be allowed. The police are not allowed to strike. I don't think that nurses and ambulance workers should be allowed to strike. Teachers, yes, I do actually think that they should be allowed to strike. But I think that there has to be much more rigorous procedures put in place and rules at this moment in time, because it's the coordinated strikes that are really going to start damaging lives. And, I just want to pick up on the other point of, we're talking about inflation's gone up, we're talking about the cost of living crisis. Every single person is affected, and every single person cannot go on strike. It's a luxury of being in employment within an industry that supports it for me.
Rob, I'll give you the final word on this. What happens to a little bit of plucky national spirit? The nation is suffering at the minute with the cost of living crisis, and its public servants have just down tools.
Patrick, there are two nations, aren't there? There's one nation of workers who are being hammered at the moment. There's another nation where Tory ministers forget to put their tax returns in and gets fined, where we get people who make fortunes out of COVID, crony capitalism, and there's billionaires have gone up by a fifth during this period. There's two nations, the nations of working class people, and including that those that are on strike, are struggling at the moment. And I tell you what's happening, those people are going to keep fighting, and we support them.
Both of you, thank you very, very much. Rob, I always appreciate you coming on and fighting the good fight. That is the Socialist Party Industrial Organiser and Trade Unionist, Rob, and, of course, the wonderful Rebecca Jane, who is the Deputy Leader of UKIP, and, crucially, for that discussion about parents being left in the lurch tomorrow, a parent herself. Right, that hour has absolutely flown by. You're with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. But coming up, we'll continue to look at Brexit Britain 3 years on as I speak to someone who's still fighting for the UK to rejoin the EU. You lost, mate. Get over it. Move on. And forget Rishi Sunak's top 5 priorities. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says it's all about stopping the Channel migrant crossings, warning the party will be absolutely obliterated if they don't get to grips with what's been going on in the Channel. Keep your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I will be back in just a tick.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m. You're watching and listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, 3 years on, the Prime Minister says Britain has taken huge strides in taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by Brexit to address the challenges facing the country. But is he right to be so optimistic? A poll published by Ipsos has found 45% of people think Brexit is going worse than they expected, up sharply from 28% in June 2021, including just over 1 in 4 of those who voted to leave in the 2016 referendum. We're going to tackle the positives and the negatives of Brexit throughout the show today as we look at how Brexit has changed the economy, our laws, our borders, and whether there's any regrets out there, and of course as well, the future of the Union. It's not all about Brexit though, don't worry people. We'll also reflect on more uncertainty when it comes to our healthcare system. Ambulance workers are set to walk out again in a dispute over pay. Apparently consultants, although as far as I was concerned, I thought they were on an absolute wedge. I don't think there'll be much sympathy out there, will there? But anyway, get in touch with your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Keep your views coming in, but before that, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News today. The Foreign Secretary has said the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. James Cleverly was responding to a question in the House of Commons over the impact of Brexit. His comments come a day after the Prime Minister said Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU 3 years ago. That's despite a recent poll suggesting 45% of Britons say Brexit is going worse than expected. Speaking to GB News, the former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg said, however, it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months, so it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year, so it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
Meanwhile, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. That's according to the International Monetary Fund, which has warned the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% this year rather than grow slightly as it had previously predicted. It says the shrinking of the economy reflects the UK's high energy prices and financial conditions, such as high inflation. The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the state of the UK's economy proves the IMF's predictions are right.
Well, if we don't want to look at the predictions, let's look at the facts of what's happened in terms of UK growth. The average growth for the UK economy has been just 2/3 under the Conservatives that it was under the last Labour government, and the UK is now the only major economy to be smaller today than it was before the COVID pandemic hit. That isn't predictions about what is to come. That is the state of the UK economy after 13 years of Conservative government.
Now, tens of thousands more teachers have joined the UK's largest education union to take part in strikes tomorrow. The National Education Union says 40,000 school staff signed up in a fortnight. Tomorrow is the first of 7 days of strikes by the union during February and March amid a pay dispute. The Education Minister, Nick Gibb, described the strikes as disruptive.
It is disappointing that the NEU has decided to go ahead with these strikes when we are still discussing issues of pay and workload and other issues very constructively. Even yesterday we were having those discussions, and strikes are disruptive to children's education, particularly after the 2 years of disruption during the COVID pandemic, and it's disrupting to parents and families as well.
UK shoppers are facing the sharpest increase in their grocery bills on record after food price inflation rose to a new high. According to the market researcher Kantar, grocery price inflation was up 16.7% year on year, with prices rising fastest in products like milk, eggs and dog food. The researcher has warned that households now face an extra £788 on their annual shopping bills due to rising costs. Police forces have apologised to the victims of the Hillsborough disaster for what they described as profound failings. The apology comes in response to a report published in 2017 that looked into the experiences of the Hillsborough families. Police chiefs have promised a cultural change almost 34 years on from the disaster. 97 football fans died as a result of a crush at a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest in 1989. An inquest jury ruled in 2016 that supporters were unlawfully killed amid a number of police errors. Now, a £10,000 reward is being offered in the hunt for Constance Martin and her newborn baby. Police believe the 35-year-old aristocrat is sleeping rough along with her child and her partner, Mark Gordon, who's a convicted sex offender. The family were last seen in East Sussex on January the 8th. And just lastly, the Ukrainian foreign minister says Ukraine will receive 120 to 140 Western tanks in a first wave of deliveries from a coalition of 12 countries. Meanwhile, footage has been released of Ukrainian soldiers being trained on how to use Leopard 2 battle tanks in Poland. They've been supplied by Germany to help support Ukraine in its ongoing war with Russia. It's expected to take up to 5 weeks before the crews are ready to use the vehicles in battle. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens now. More from Patrick.
Today marks 3 years since Brexit Day. So this calls for a big Brexit special, doesn't it? There is a Brexit angle to almost every single major national news story, and that's basically what we're going to be doing throughout the show today. We're going to take you back to the initial wave of that tub-thumping patriotic optimism, look at the reasons behind why Britain voted to leave the European Union, and what people hope Brexit would look like, as well as assessing where we are today. How's the economy doing? It's been battered by COVID and the war in Ukraine. The latest IMF figures are all about Britain in decline, but we'll be giving you some reasons to be optimistic, and whether or not those figures have been massaged somewhat. Taking full control of our laws was another priority. Could pulling out of the ECHR help sort that out? On a similar note, actually, immigration was, of course, a whopping great big factor in the Brexit vote. Yet, we are seeing record levels of both legal and illegal immigration. I'll get stuck right into that shortly. Are there people living their post-Brexit lives now full of regret? Have we got loads of people out there who voted for Brexit, who'd vote Remain if they had the chance to do it again? I want to know. And what's the state of the Union post-Brexit? We'll be going all over the UK today with our team of video journalists to see what the Scots, the Welsh and the fair people of Northern Ireland have to say. But, of course, we are nothing without you, the wonderful people. So we'll be getting GB News viewers and listeners on the airwaves, easy for me to say, to tell us what they wanted from Brexit and talk about what they've actually got. Brexit was, of course, about taking back control of our borders, our laws and our money. So 3 years on, join me as we do a deep dive into Brexit Britain. We can cross live now to Downing Street and speak to our GB News political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, thank you very, very much. Brexit Britain, 3 years on since the big day. What's happening?
Well, the debate's not over in many ways, Patrick. It is politically in some ways settled in the sense that you've got the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister, and indeed the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson today talking about the benefits of Brexit, and indeed the future to come. You've got a Labour Party not really willing to engage too much on the subject in the sense that they don't want to open up old wounds. Also, their main mantra is to make Brexit in some ways work better. But, and this is why I said the debate is not over, you have had a shift in public opinion. Notably, quite a few people seem to now think that it was a mistake for Britain to leave in 2016. However, that's different from a whole load of people wanting to rejoin the EU, because that's not necessarily where we're at. But the polls do show that Britain still remains pretty divided on all of this. And why is it? It was because none of this is terribly straightforward. It's all pretty complex stuff. As you say, you could almost get every single issue of British politics today and look at through the prism of Brexit. I'm not entirely sure that would be helpful. But if you look at the economy, the latest predictions from the IMF, some will point out that's largely driven by the pandemic, largely driven by the fact that we locked down for multiple times over the space of 2 years and all that flew from that. Also, clearly, the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis has not helped. Global inflation is part of that narrative as well. For some on the other side, they would point to the OBR and to the Bank of England, saying that there has been a massive impact on trade, an adverse impact on trade, and also that there are and have been a fall in the number of EU migrants, which is an impact on the labour force, the number of people available for jobs in this country. And it goes on and on and on. And I suppose, Patrick, that's my fundamental point in this argument about Brexit. It's never going to be settled. Our relationship with Europe is never going to be settled, because that's just politics. That's just democracy. And clearly, how we deal with our partners, whether it's on defence, whether it's got to do with economics, will continue to carry on. But I think the overwhelming sense from the public today is that Brexit is on the back burner, simply because we do not, I think for most people, want to live through those very, very divisive years. After that vote in 2016, all the rows in Parliament, people, I think, want the government and indeed politicians to focus on the more immediate problems that face this country, like industrial action, like inflation, and like the fact that, yes, we do somehow need to boost economic growth, even if that means being outside of the European Union, in the sense that going inside, all right, well, that's not going to be part of the political narrative, I don't think, in the short term at least.
Well, you say that, Darren. Darren, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, they're our political editor from the steps outside Downing Street, but we've managed to track somebody down for whom rejoining the European Union is indeed a top priority. With me now is Richard Hewison, leader of the imaginatively named Rejoin EU party. There you go, fantastic.
Thank you, Patrick.
Well, look, why can't you just accept democracy and get on with making Britain a great thing? Stop pouring petrol through our letterbox and striking a match.
Well, let's start with that second point you raised. Why don't I make Britain a great place? I have no power to actually do that. Now, our vote to leave the European Union was 7 years ago, and of course, as we know, it's very controversial, lots of passionate arguments both sides, but things have moved on since then, Patrick. We've now, as I say, 7 years on, everybody under 25 in this country has now never had a say on their future. And a lot of those people are quite angry. And you're right, you said earlier on about, let's talk about the positives and the negatives. Well, I'm going to start with some of the negatives. And if I can take a very selfish point of view, today marks 3 years since my right to retire to a sunny climate in Spain was taken away.
Why? Spain still exists, so you can get on a plane.
And I have to come back after every 6 months.
So hang on a second. So Brexit has wiped Spain off the map, has it?
Brexit has wiped our retirement opportunities off the map.
Why?
I can no longer go to Spain and retire. I could before. Now I have to come back after 6 months because that's the rules now that we've been there.
I know plenty of people who've got properties in Spain and live out there.
And they become Spanish citizens. I don't want to be a Spanish citizen. I'm a UK citizen. I'm very proud to be a UK citizen. I'm going to stay a UK citizen. I'm not going to change to a Spanish citizen. I wanted those rights. They've been taken away. Secondly, my business. I had the right to take my business anywhere I wanted in Europe and base it there as long as I wanted to. Now I cannot.
Would you have done that so that you didn't have to pay tax in the UK?
No, I wouldn't have done that so I didn't have to pay tax in the UK. Whilst I'm not desperate to pay my taxes, I do believe that as a citizen you have an obligation to follow the law and
So you would have just on a whim, just got your business and just moved somewhere in the EU, just for the sake of it, not in any way to avoid paying tax over here?
Not to avoid paying tax, because it's an interesting experience. I moved my business to Hong Kong in 2003. I moved my business to New York in 2014. In both cases, I had a great time, but the lack of freedom of movement forced me to come back.
Interesting that you mentioned Hong Kong, because as well, obviously, since we voted for Brexit, we were nimble enough to be able to allow something like 250,000 Hong Kongers to be able to come and live in the UK without having to have any kind of consultation whatsoever from our European
Which we could
friends.
have done anyway. We could have done that anyway, Patrick.
OK, so go on, some of the other negatives for us.
So in terms of other negatives, my children have had their rights taken away from them to actually go and study abroad. The Erasmus scheme has been scrapped. The new replacement scheme is nothing like as good, and many people already experience it. Because many people already experiencing it are talking about how they are paying much more money than they expected to have to pay on the Turing scheme, it's called, isn't it? The Erasmus scheme was open to everybody. It was a nice, flexible scheme for people to join on, and many, many people had great experiences on that. All of that has been gone. Now, these are some of the negatives, but as you say, in a democratic society, we need to balance it with the positives. Now, I can't see any positives from my point of view.
Are you vaccinated?
That have come out. I am indeed
vaccinated. You get vaccinated quicker than all your European friends who you love so much in Spain on the retirement?
I don't think I did, no. I think the vaccines would have been developed independently, irrespective of...
But they weren't there, were they?
Well,
and that's crucial, because we can all
Patrick,
deal in myths, can't we? But the fact of the matter is that if we were a member of the European Union, you would not have had your COVID.
That's not true. Because,
well, it is, because it happened.
No, it's not true. We're talking about the 31st of January 2020 when we left.
How's that French vaccine?
We didn't actually leave the European Union in terms of the transitional arrangements until December that year, and yet those vaccines...
What I find amazing is that France, which is still... By the way, this is not a comment on the efficacy of the vaccine, it's just a point about the fact that the vaccine did exist and people were inclined to take it and we were able to get it. If it was so good being a part of the European Union, why did France nick our vaccines en route to the UK?
Oh, come off it. This was a global pandemic, Patrick. We had a duty as a planet to come together to develop those vaccines.
Did they have a duty to nick some of our vaccines?
Well, I'm sorry. I think we have a duty to vaccinate citizens globally.
But they were ours. We bought them. And
but what do you mean they were our vaccines?
So the UK had bought vaccines from a plant that it had funded, and as they were about to enter the United Kingdom, the French commandeered...
So are you suggesting that UK citizens were not vaccinated as a result of French citizens being vaccinated?
Yes, literally, because they
took
those
vaccines. That's the first I've heard of this.
Well, you need to read the news a little bit more, don't you? When we decided that we were going to help Ukraine, and some would argue maybe potentially stop World War III in Europe and stop Europe falling into the hands of mad, bad Vladimir Putin... I believe the Germans sent a few thousand helmets. We actually sent weapons, didn't we?
I believe that the response to Ukraine has been pathetic by all nations, including the UK.
So what
the very fact that we still allow the Russian embassy to exist in London, organising its propaganda, shows that we are not serious about tackling.
I get that, but undeniably, we dealt with the war in Ukraine in a much more nimble way than any of the European Union countries, didn't we?
I have to say, I do disagree with that. And I disagree with it because I think what we did was the very basic, decent thing that we'd expect many people to do. I was very disappointed with some of the individual governments and their attitudes
so the European
EU
Union's governments and the Commission weren't basic or decent?
Well, the European Union is not an organisation that has at its disposal a defence force. It's still a collection of 27 individual countries that have their own individual
armies. Is that why they want an EU army, which we were told...
Which I think would make life a lot better, myself, if we did have that.
We were told, weren't we, that don't worry, if you stay in the European Union, I can tell you now, we're not going to have an EU army. Well, actually, hang on a minute. They do.
Well, 7 years after that vote, we still don't have an EU army. Personally, and again, you know, I'm not representative of everybody who's pro-EU. I would like to see a united force for good in Europe because I think there are so many problems in the rest of the world that a good, liberal army of might, righteous power, if you like, trying to persuade the Chinese government, trying to persuade the Russian government, and to a certain extent the American government to live up to their global responsibilities would be a very, very effective thing to do.
They've got a bit in common with the Chinese government, haven't they? Because the people at the top of the EU aren't elected either.
Well, neither are the people at the top of the UK government.
Yeah, not at the minute, to be fair. That is a good point. And on that particular moment, actually, we can find, on a point of agreement, that we should have a general election in this country,
Absolutely.
in my view. We can leave it there. I must say, I've thoroughly enjoyed that, actually. Thank you very, very much. Nothing like a little bit of back and forth. There's Richard Harrison there, the leader of the Rejoin EU party. Right, well, GB News is the People's Channel, and this show is, of course, nothing without you lot at home. So... I want you, there we go, that's right, I want you to give your take on this. GB News viewers Julie Ford and Brian Dugan. They're on now, yes. Oh, you took me by surprise there. I thought we were going to an advert break first, but I will start with you, Julie. Ladies first. How do you feel about Brexit 3 years on?
Well, I think 3 years on, we should be having a bank holiday for it, shouldn't we? I mean, it deserves something. I think it's just, for me, a real shame that it's taken this long. I'm a bit of a let's get stuff done kind of girl. I think I probably would have had it wrapped up in a couple of weeks. But for me, I voted to leave the EU, and I did that from what I believed was an educated standpoint. At the time, I had a holiday-let business in France, so I was very aware of the impact that might have on me. But I still don't regret the decision that I made. I just think it's a real shame that everything is taking so long. I work in the legal factor over here in the UK, and for me, my main reason for leaving was law. I think we have a very good judicial system, and I don't think we need to be overseen by another country to decide whether our laws are good enough or not.
I'll stop you there, Julie, because I want to come back to you. I know that's a point that's made quite a lot, isn't it? And I think the ECHR, which we've dealt with, will return to as well, the idea that people from Luxembourg, Slovenia, etc., would have a say over what we can do in our legal system over here. I think sticks in the craw somewhat for a lot of people. Brian, I'll throw it over to you now, 3 years on from the big Brexit day. Your hot take on where we are?
Well, where are we? I mean, it's difficult to decipher in some respects, Patrick. But I think what we can say that we've had no great benefits so far. I don't see them economically. Okay, there are other factors such as the pandemic. There has been a war. There have been other factors, but Brexit hasn't put us on a footing whereby we're able to withstand things any better. I mean, you very rightly pointed out about the vaccines, but in terms of European countries, we are lagging behind in terms of growth. We will be the only country out of the G7 not to show growth.
It is interesting you say that, and I'm just, by the way, I'm just going to caveat what I'm about to say, which is, and I possibly should have raised this, although I didn't want to give an inch with Richard, who's still here, I am disappointed with how Brexit's gone. I don't think we've had, full throttle Brexit at all, or anything like the kind of Brexit that a lot of people who voted for it wanted. But just to pick you up on that, the IMF buried in their stats the fact that the UK had performed more strongly in 2022 than anticipated, growing by 4.1%. The EU grew as a whole by 3.5%. So I do get what you mean, which is that we are not exactly entering the sunlit uplands head first, but it's not potentially all doom and gloom. Brian, I'll just stick with you before I lob it back Julie's way. Why do you think that Brexit hasn't exactly banged in the way that a lot of Brexiteers like? Some people would say it's because we had a Remainer in charge of the whole thing to begin with.
I think that's a good point, but doesn't that sum the whole thing up in an instant? Because defining what Brexit was or would be or will be is still beyond the realms of most people's understanding. We're still actually debating what Brexit is. But that's a really good point. There was no real consensus as such. It was quite close. Obviously, there was a majority of people who felt that leaving the EU would be in our best interests. And listen, in the long run, perhaps it will be, but we had no certainty about that. And in terms of defining what Brexit is, we're still talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol in relation to that, and there's still no agreement in place in terms of that. And until you get something like that, which is pretty kind of basic in terms of it all, because you've got to have a border somewhere, well, we're not going to really advance the whole argument very much further, are we?
OK, Julie, final word to you. I think I know the answer to this, but would you vote for Brexit again if there was another referendum today?
Yeah, absolutely. I stick by the decision that I made to leave the EU. I think the decision I made was the right one. I just think, echoing exactly what's just been said there, the problem was when we went to leave the EU, nobody had a plan. And nobody in Parliament stays in a job long enough to actually get a job done. Politicians are moving posts left, right and centre. And how can you expect to get anything to resolution? You're not building relationships with your opposite number or anything like that. So, of course, it hasn't gone smoothly, but it's just a shame. But I wouldn't change my opinion at all.
Both of you, thank you very much. Great to have actual viewers and listeners live on the telly. It's GB News, after all. We are the People's Channel. That's Julie Ford and Brian Dugan. I'll chat to you both again soon. Take care. Right, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, a top legal commentator has told GB News that he believes it's highly unlikely the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch the treaty. Those in favour of withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights believe Brexit cannot be fully realised while the UK remains in the ECHR. I'll be back in a tick.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, with 60% of voters in Scotland wanting to remain in the UK, it's no surprise Holyrood's governing parties have branded Brexit an, quote, unmitigated disaster for the country. SNP External Affairs Secretary Angus Robertson said today, 3 years on from Brexit, the evidence is clear that it has been hugely damaging to the economy and has worsened the cost of living crisis. He also suggested independence was the only way out, but they want an independent country in Europe anyway. Here to pick through the bones of this is Liberal Democrat for Edinburgh West. It's Christine Jardine who joins me now. Christine, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Right, so 3 years on from that day where everyone was waving their flags and you were probably crying into your tea or something like that. We all voted to leave. Sorry, we all actually got out of the European Union. How do you feel 3 years on? Do you want to drag us back in?
Well, I was just listening to what you were saying there about the SNP, and you have to take your hat off to them and the way they managed to twist things. You know, the SNP didn't really lift much of a finger to keep Scotland and the United Kingdom in the European Union. They actually spent more on a by-election in Shetland, a Scottish parliamentary by-election in Shetland, which anybody who knows anything about it will tell you has a population, I think it's about 70,000. But they spent more on that than they did on the European referendum. So now 3 years after Brexit, they're saying, it's terrible. Scotland's been dragged out. Yeah, Scotland did. The majority of people in Scotland did vote to stay in, but that was no thanks to the SNP. And on top of that, the arguments they make about independence, anyone who was, paying attention to what the Brexit campaign were saying will notice the remarkable similarities between the reasons that were given for leaving the European Union for the reasons that the SNP used for leaving the UK. I mean, which way is it they want it?
No, thank you. I'm very glad that you pointed that out. I am currently agreeing with the Liberal Democrat right here on GB News. They are making... The case that they are making for an independent Scotland is the one pretty much that they said would be an absolute show for them if we voted to leave the European Union. If they tied themselves in knots north of the border, do you think?
The problem with the SNP is that they say whatever it takes at the moment for independence. That it is the only thing really that they are concerned about. So if you say that, leaving the European Union would be the best thing for Scottish independence, then they'll say that it's the best thing. If you say it's the worst thing for Scottish independence, then, they will go for that as well. They just say whatever it takes in the moment. They care about little else. And people in Scotland, we've become incredibly frustrated, the majority, because remember, it is the majority who still do not want independence. We've become incredibly frustrated with all they ever talk about in the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis. The NHS in Scotland is in as perilous a state as the NHS in the rest of the United Kingdom. We have terrible ambulance waiting times as well. We have a teachers' strike. But what do the SNP talk about? Independence.
Yeah.
They don't address...
Well, yeah. And the hill that Nicola Sturgeon appears to have chosen remarkably and bizarrely to die on at the minute is the trans rights in prisons stuff at the minute, which, I mean, she was asked... Can I just say, the SNP, I don't mind saying this, the SNP refuse to come on my show. So they don't come on my show. And I think it was evidence yesterday. Why? Because when you ask Nicola Sturgeon very basic questions about gender identity and prisons, she just can't answer them because her ideology is tied her in knots. Can you just explain to me what the Lib Dems position is in Scotland then? So you don't want independence, obviously, I take it, and you...
No.
But does that put you in a bit of a sticky wicket because the vast majority of Scots do want to rejoin the European Union? To rejoin the EU.
Well, to rejoin the European Union, the vast majority of Scots, I think, now recognise that leaving the European Union was not what most people in Scotland wanted, but that's where we are. And rejoining the European Union as an independent Scotland would be well nigh impossible because there are certain criteria. There's Copenhagen criteria for joining the European Union, which Scotland as an independent nation wouldn't meet. Now, the European Union had its fingers burnt once when Greece's entry went all disastrously wrong. So they are now even more careful than they were in the past. And you've got countries like Spain and France who have and Denmark as well, I think, who have, Belgium, I beg your pardon, who have separatist regions who, they don't want to say to them, oh, yes, of course you can have independence and stay within the European Union. Can you imagine what that might do in Catalonia if the Spaniards were to say that? So for the SNP to keep saying to people, oh, it's fine, be an independent Scotland and we'll get back into the European Union is just not it's not realistic. It's not fair, and it's misleading people.
No, well, given some of the policies that have been doing the rounds north of the border at the minute, I think it's fair to say that maybe they're not always living in the real world. But thank you very much, Liberal Democrat for Edinburgh West. It's Christine Jardine, who we managed to actually agree. Normally, Christine and I have a bit of back and forth, but it's rather pleasant, I thought. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the 3-year anniversary marking the UK's exit from the European Union. Who have we got now? Lucy. Lucy says, those saying Brexit isn't working, well, what do they expect? We've had a pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has completely flattened the economy. Fair enough. D says, I voted Remain, but would vote Leave now. D, I suspect you might be a rare breed, but I'd love to hear from you. Those ignoring the results of a democratic vote disgust me. That we're always going to be winners and losers. Yes, the second referendum brigade were out in force. In fact, we did have one here just a few minutes ago, actually, to be fair, didn't we? He tragically now can't retire to Spain, supposedly, because Brexit wiped Spain off the map, supposedly. But Stephen says, the fantastic oven-ready deal left us stuck with thousands of existing EU laws, good point there, Stephen, and regulations, along with a disastrous ECHR membership. Can't the UK have their own human rights? Well, yes, you would have thought so. It does all break down for me when they say, well, the only people who aren't in the ECHR in Europe are Russia and Belarus. Oh, that puts us in the same club. Yeah, it does, apart from the fact that we're not Russia or Belarus, and we've got absolutely nothing else in common with them, pretty much. So why would we, just because we could do if we wanted to, run roughshod over human rights? You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, Suella Braverman has warned her fellow Tory MPs that failure to stop the boats will lead to electoral wipeout. It comes as the ECHR faces criticisms for its role in the UK law, with some believing that withdrawal from the convention would go some way to helping tackle the illegal channel crossings. Well, we need any help we can get at the minute, don't we? We'll discuss that next, but first, it is time for your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories on GB News. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has said the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. His comment comes on a day after the Prime Minister said Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU 3 years ago. That's despite a recent poll suggesting Britons are rather divided, with 45% saying Brexit is going worse than expected and 55% saying it's about the same as they expected or better. Speaking to GB News, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months. So it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided jolly nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year. So it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
Meanwhile, the UK's economy is expected to perform worse than all other advanced economies this year, according to the IMF, as the cost of living crisis continues. The International Monetary Fund says the UK's GDP will shrink by 0.6% this year, rather than grow slightly as it previously predicted. The Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has said the new data shows the UK economy falling behind other G7 nations.
Can he explain why the UK is still the only G7 economy that is smaller now than it was before the pandemic? Why is the UK the only G7 economy with its growth forecast downgraded this year? Why are we at the bottom of the league table both this year and next year too? And can the Minister answer this? Why should anyone trust the Conservatives with the economy ever again?
Lancashire Police, searching for a missing woman, are appealing for a potential key witness now to come forward. 45-year-old Nicola Bully was last seen next to the River Wire on Friday. She was walking her little dog, Willow. Police say they're keen now to find a man who was seen walking a small, white, fluffy dog in the area at around the time Nicola disappeared. He's described as being around 70 years old and 6 foot tall. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Stay with us. Back in a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back, wonderful people. Now, Suella Braverman has warned that it's critical the Conservatives stop the small boat crossings and that failure to do so will lead to electoral defeat. Well, yeah, you don't say. The Home Secretary says both her reputation and this government's is on the line as she tries to get control over the issue in her role as Home Secretary. And to complicate matters, rifts have now emerged in the Tory party over the European Convention on Human Rights jurisdiction over the UK. Some backbench MPs are calling for the government to leave the ECHR as it could help tackle the migration issues, but others fear that this could violate international law. Barrister Rebecca Butler joins me now. Great to have you on the show. Any second now. There she is. Good stuff. OK, and a wonderful view behind you as well, might I say. Fantastic. Someone's come prepared. Right, Rebecca, would leaving the ECHR actually breach international law?
Well, it depends what you mean by international law. Let's just take India, for example. That's a country that complies with all international law obligations, but it's not part of the ECHR. And then you have, as I heard you mention before the break, there are countries like Russia who out and out disregard international law, and they are members of the ECHR. So, I think that the narrative has shifted too far to this sort of nuclear solution of whether we're going to stay in ECHR or not. I don't see that as the solution. I see repealing the Human Rights Act as a solution to the migrant crisis, because the UK is always capable of saying and justifying any of its internal laws to ECHR by saying we are doing this for integrity of our borders and for national security. And those arguments actually will trump human rights, reports to the ECHR.
Just to say, I think a lot of people are massively annoyed at the idea of someone from Luxembourg or Slovenia or wherever getting involved and saying, no, you cannot deport this particular person from your country. In your view, how would getting us out of the ECHR, repealing the Human Rights Act, for example, help solve what is top of a lot of people's list, which is the Channel migrant crisis?
Well, you mustn't conflate the EU with the ECHR, so it wouldn't be somebody in Brussels or Luxembourg, it's actually the court in Strasbourg. So it isn't an EU institution. But, nobody accuses France, who has a much stricter asylum and migration policy than us. Nobody accuses France of being in breach of ECHR. The issue here, Patrick, with the greatest respect to all parties, is politicians are too weak in the UK. We've had, 2.5 years of Boris Johnson, who was just, banging from one catastrophe to the next. Rishi Sunak having this feeling that he can't do any big manoeuvres for fear of his backbenchers. We need strong political will to get this Rwanda policy through. And Suella Braverman is absolutely bang on the money. And I'm afraid to say, I know it's toxic at the moment. I think Dominic Raab, in his civil liberties bill, was absolutely right to say that the Human Rights Act needs to be repealed. So, you have to look at what other ECHR signatories do to protect their borders, and you have to ask why British politicians are failing to do their best for the British populace. There is a difference.
Can I ask you that? Do you think they're too afraid of controversy? Do you think they're too afraid of their mates on the continent holding their nose and saying, you're doing things differently to us? Because I thought that's what Brexit was all about. We were going to take control, and to hell with the rest of you.
Yeah, but to be honest, the relationship between, for example, us and France, Macron and Boris was very tricky. Liz Truss really didn't help matters at all. But now Rishi, more of a technocrat, very much more like Emmanuel Macron, sitting in the centre. We have a better relationship with France, and it's critical for us that we do have a good relationship with France because of policing the French coastline. However, France has as much of a problem with Ocean Viking in the Mediterranean as we have with the Coast Guard bringing the dinghies across. So whatever we've got in the UK in terms of illegal migration, France has got at least 3 to 4 times the problem that we have now, and those people are going and aiming to go directly to France. So don't think that we have by any means the worst problem. The problem is absolutely. To France.
Absolutely not. No, it's just the fact that we have this kind of nature's moat around us, don't we? And it appears to be being breached. Well, it is being breached on a daily basis when the weather's not absolutely catastrophic, and I think that makes it quite galling. Rebecca, thank you very much, as ever. And talking about the small boats, I can see a few small boats behind you there. Make sure they don't come across the channel. Barrister Rebecca Butler there, joining us from a wonderful setting in some kind of boat yard. Well, here now is our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joining me live in the studio. Mark, you're chuckling away.
Boatyard.
Is that what it's called? Marina. Look, I'm from the north, all right? I don't know, boatyard. That's what I call it, all right? Anyway, right, so talking about boats. Well, back to business, Mark, right? Talking about boats, they're still coming across the channel?
None today, as far as we know. We're expecting, actually, the weather to start improving again as we get to the weekend. As we know, the pressure has really been taken off the government in recent months because of the foul weather in the channel that's really only allowed a few days where it's been flat calm for the boats to come across in any numbers. We saw again at the weekend there, 189 people came across the English Channel. Yep. We're at almost 1,200 so far this year. Not as high as this time last year, but when that weather improves, Patrick, we know we'll be talking very significant numbers because the fact is that around Dunkirk, around Calais, even further down towards Boulogne, there are thousands of people in these makeshift camps. Rebecca was on about the French having a problem with those charities that are helping take migrants across the Mediterranean. Well, in recent months, they've been coming across in their thousands in southern Europe. They will work their way up eventually to northern Europe because for many of them, they either want to get to, industrial heartlands like Germany or they want to get to northwestern France with a view to coming to the UK.
Yeah, indeed. And as you've alluded to, I think it's worth emphasising again, you are expecting, or people in the know as well are expecting this problem to get worse before it gets better, in light of the fact that Suella Braverman has come out and said, well, hey, if we don't sort this out, we're doomed at the next election. Well, it looks like they're doomed, doesn't it?
Well, she's stating the obvious, and of course the government has set itself up to an extent by saying that this is a top priority and that they will deal with the small boats crisis. Well, we'll see what happens when the weather improves, because there's nothing that I've seen in what the policy currently is that will actually make any really significant dent on the numbers coming across. Because as far as Rwanda is concerned, it's not happening, Patrick. It's mired in court challenges. And the government has already publicly said it won't put anyone on a flight until all of the court proceedings are done. That could be into next year before we finally get a conclusion that actually is good enough for the government to start putting people on a plane. So in the meantime, people will come. Then there's the other issue. Are you dismantling the people smugglers on the other side of the channel? To be fair to the National Crime Agency, they are improving, and they are making some inroads in arresting and dismantling some of these gangs. But it's such a lucrative trade that there's always criminals who are willing to step into the breach and do that work and earn many millions of pounds on a good week.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it is an incredibly, incredibly lucrative, disgraceful industry, isn't it? Just very quickly, Mark, on this, just referring back to the ECHR, someone's got in touch about this, and I think they've made a fair point, actually, is we could stay in the ECHR and just ignore them, couldn't we?
Well, many European countries actually do just that. It's exactly what Rebecca was saying about how much more robust they seem to be in terms of their ability to actually rule in favour or ignore rules that are against their self-interest, their national interest on some key issues. So perhaps there is an argument for our politicians maybe to get a bit more of a backbone.
Thank you very, very much, Mark White there, our wonderful Home and Security Editor. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this 3-year anniversary marking the UK's exit from the EU. Jane says if Boris was still in office, this country would have seen the full effects of leaving the EU. In my opinion, the majority of our politicians want to stay in the European Union. Well, they do. This creates even more divide and unrest in the country, just what the politicians want. I think it's difficult for me to try to hark back now to 2016 and the couple of years that followed that. But I think, arguably more so than ever in my lifetime anyway, I noticed a much bigger disconnect between the general public and the people in Westminster. And that was over the European Union. It did seem as though the public had spoken and people there elected, even people whose own constituents had voted for Brexit, were doing absolutely everything they could to overturn the democratic will of the people. One thing I will just push back on a little bit, if you'll let me, Jane, about Boris, who, hey, I've been a fan of, don't get me wrong, I will not bash Boris, but you said we would have seen the full effects of leaving the EU. I mean, it was Boris Johnson's oven-ready Brexit deal that we've got, so you could argue that maybe we did have Boris's version of Brexit. Anyway, there you go. Helen, one more, says the Ramonas never give up, do they? Time and time again, they try to make a case how Brexit was a disaster. In due time, they will see how important the exit was for the people of this country. Look, I kind of agree with you, really, which is that I think, yes, we were cut off at the knees by the coronavirus crisis. We were cut off at the knees, frankly, by a lot of people already in this country. As I alluded to, there are people in Westminster themselves doing everything they could to pour petrol through the letterbox of this nation and strike a match, instead of all getting together and trying to make the best of Brexit. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, some would say, but I believe as long as we are out, in your views there as well, as long as we are out, at least we've got the opportunity to be a bit more nimble, haven't we? But I must say, the clock is ticking, because it should be a lot easier than it is. It should be a lot easier than it is for me to sit here and rattle off and make the case for how Brexit has been a great thing for this country. Because, look, at the minute, we're having to try to stretch it a bit, aren't we, some would say. Right, moving on. Downing Street has said that it is deeply concerning that ambulance workers will be striking again on the 10th of February. Unison's announcement that 5 services in England will be walking out means that there will only be one day next week when NHS workers aren't taking industrial action. Continuing strikes are intended to put huge pressure on the government, but Sunak's administration maintains that the above-inflation pay rises requested are unaffordable. Lucy Johnston is Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. I think you should be Health and Social Affairs Editor here. You're on here often enough, and you join me now. Thank you very much. OK, so we were originally going to talk a little bit about consultants, but lo and behold, if you blink these days, somebody else goes on strike. And now ambulance workers, they're back striking again. I'm getting a little bit sick of it. What's the latest?
Well, we've got now coordinated strike action. So you've got over the next month, and particularly February the 6th, nurses and ambulances. It will be the biggest industrial action the NHS has ever seen, and it's a mass walkout. And over the next month, as you've said, there'll only be one day when no one is striking. So we've already got, it's estimated about 88,000 people have had appointments or operations cancelled as a result of the strikes. And that's really where the pressure is. Hospital flow is actually not really apparently being affected so much because less people are going to hospital, but actually it's patients at home, many of whom, as you know, will be in a lot of pain and suffering.
But I'm just struggling to see how this actually makes anything better for them. What they are asking for is, unless they've wiggled on this, which last time I checked they haven't, is an above inflation pay rise, which then you would have to give the teachers, then you would have to give, well, anyone who's striking. So we cannot afford that. We absolutely cannot afford that. What the government has said is we'll try to improve your working conditions. Rishi Sunak announced his plan earlier on, didn't he? You know, I think it was 5,000 more beds, 800 new ambulances, virtual wards, etc. This was supposed to be a strike over pay and conditions, but actually it's just about pay, isn't it?
It is, and you're absolutely right. Once you, I mean, the nurses, if they go on strike and they get a pay rise, other people's salaries, like physiotherapists, occupational therapists, dietitians, they're all tied together in the same band, so they will all receive the same pay rise. And I think even if they had a 10% rise, the nurses, then that would mean we're shelling out another 7-8 billion to that whole band. So, and if that then is copied with other people, other public sector workers who are on strike, it will cost the country. That said, without any wriggle room, without negotiating at all, I think the nursing staff and ambulance staff, they really are feeling like they can't do their jobs. They feel absolutely at the end of their tether. So I don't think they're doing this because they're just I don't think it's all about money.
No, I do get that. I do get that. Just a quick one with you, Lucy, because I originally was going to do a bit of a discussion now, actually, about consultants supposedly thinking about taking strike action. Now, it's one thing people shouting at their TV screens now going, Patrick, you're not on the side of the workers. Patrick, the poor nurses, they are angels. And, hey, look, I understand that. I just don't think an above-inflation pay rise is the way. However, don't you dare come at me about consultants. I'm having a look here now on my computer screen. NHS consultant doctors' pay across the UK. It's got here, starting salary, 82.5 grand. Cry me a river. Cost of living crisis, my backside, Lucy. They can't go on strike, surely.
Well, there is a different argument with consultants. They do have weekends where they're either on call, but they have the ability to go and do their private work. They do have a six-figure salary after they've paid off their, once you're a junior doctor, that's a different story. But consultants are not in the same ballgame as nurses. That is a different story, and they will have a platinum pension at the end of it all. So there may be less public sympathy for consultants. That's not to say they don't work very hard. And,
I suspect so. I suspect when somebody in the NHS, one of the 88,000 people who've had an appointment cancelled since this wave of strikes started, goes up and they go, oh, can I get my consultant's appointment today? And they go, oh, no, sorry, that bloke on £82,500 as a starting salary is striking over pay and conditions, so I'm afraid your hernia is going to have to wait. Lucy, thank you very much. As ever, always much appreciated. It will only be a matter of hours, I imagine, before I talk to you again, the amount that you're on here. But we wouldn't have it any other way. Lucy Johnson is Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, no less. Right, OK, so let's end the hour with some more of your views. The third anniversary of Brexit. Just a couple of quick ones. Martin says taking control of our borders and stopping the EU, telling us what we can and can't do is the only reason I voted for Brexit. Yet nothing has changed. I feel so let down. A lot of people feel let down. A lot of people feel very, very let down. But I suppose the argument will be as long as we're out, at least we've got the chance to get it right. I don't know. What do you think? Chase says, just one more now. If Boris had taken advantage of his 80-seat majority and left the European courts in the first 6 months, I'm certain we wouldn't have the issues regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol. Yeah, OK, I've got to wrap it, actually, but I do agree with you on that. I think we missed the massive opportunity right at the start of Brexit. When that vote came through, we just messed around with Theresa May, who, frankly, Didn't know what she was up to, did she, with that? Coming up, we'll look at Brexit Britain 3 years on. Yeah, I've been talking about that throughout. And I will be joined by the man himself, Mr. Brexit, Nigel Farage. And all of that is coming your way very, very shortly. But now some weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Increasingly windy for many of us through the rest of the day, but particularly in the north where there are also blustery showers. Clear spells in the south. We've seen a cold front move through here as a weakening feature. Now that cloud is clearing, sunshine is returning across England and Wales. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, tightly packed isobars, a northwesterly breeze bringing chilly air and frequent showers. Now those showers are falling as snow above 400 or 500 metres over central Scotland. But it's the wind that is the main concern as we head into the night time, with gales widely across northern Scotland and for some exposed coasts of northern Scotland, especially around Orkney, Lewis, the North Mainland, 60, 70, perhaps 80 mile per hour in places. That could cause disruption. And it's going to be a cold night, 3 or 4 Celsius in the north, 5 to 7 further south. Although in the south, it'll be a bright start to Wednesday, having been, well, a mixture of clear spells and cloud overnight. Some sunshine, the best of which will be in the south, remaining into the afternoon. Also brightening up in the north of Scotland, the wind and the showery activity easing in between an area of cloud and some outbreaks of rain for Northern Ireland, west and southwest Scotland and northern England. A chilly day again in the north, 7 or 8 Celsius, further south 9 to 11 degrees, but the wind becoming less of an issue later Wednesday, that wind tending to become lighter. Although it will turn wetter once again across the northern half of the UK, some steady rain into Scotland and northern England overnight. Northern Ireland seeing a lot of cloud and a few spots of rain. Clouds thickening further south as well, and so a frost-free night for the vast majority, although a touch of frost is possible in the far north ahead of the rain. Then that rain lingers across much of Scotland through Thursday, a damp day to come. The heaviest rain, though, over Western Hills. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud cover, I think, on Thursday. Some light rain over Western Hills further south as well. But it is turning much milder. Temperatures up into the double figures widely.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's just gone 5 p.m. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, it's 3 years to the day since the UK officially left the EU. Our Brexit-backing PM said Britain has taken huge strides towards taking advantage of our independence. But many feel that we've never had a proper Brexit. A poll published by Ipsos has found 45% of people think Brexit is going worse than they expected. But if you flip that on its head, surely that means that most people actually think that it is going rather well. So maybe we should be leading on that. Up sharply from 28% in June 2021, including just over 1 in 4 of those who voted to leave the EU in 2016. There is very much another angle on those figures, isn't there? The whole point of Brexit was to take back control of our laws, our borders and our money. And throughout this show, I will be taking a deep dive into Brexit Britain to see how we're doing on all of those key issues, as well as looking at the state of the Union. It's not all Brexit, though, people. Don't worry, I know, bitter Brexit fatigue. But we'll also reflect more on the uncertainty when it comes to our healthcare system. Ambulance workers are set to walk out again in a dispute over pay next Friday. Consultants, who, as far as I can tell, are on a starting salary of about 82.5 grand, they're also considering strike action. Cheers. Teachers are reportedly not telling their own schools if they're striking tomorrow, which means parents with jobs will turn up at the gates tomorrow and supposedly, anyway, not know if they're going to have to homeschool their kids. Get in touch with your thoughts, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Questions for you today, pretty straightforward stuff, actually. What's your top priority for Brexit Britain now going forward? And what would you say to people who still want a second referendum? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, though, here's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. You're watching GB News, and the top story today. The Foreign Secretary has said the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. James Cleverly was responding to a question in the House of Commons over the impact of Brexit 3 years on. His comments come a day after the Prime Minister said Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU. That's despite a recent poll suggesting Britons are divided in their take on how Brexit has progressed, with 45% saying it's going worse than expected and 55% thinking it's about the same as they expected or better. Speaking to GB News, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg, however, said it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months, so it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year, so it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
Tens of thousands more teachers have joined the UK's largest education union to take part in strike action tomorrow. The National Education Union says 40,000 school staff signed up in a fortnight. Tomorrow is the first of 7 days of strikes by the union in February and March, amid a dispute over pay. The Education Minister, Nick Gibb, described the strikes as disruptive.
It is disappointing that the NEU has decided to go ahead with these strikes when we are still discussing issues of pay and workload and other issues very constructively. Even yesterday we were having those discussions, and strikes are disruptive to children's education, particularly after the 2 years of disruption during the COVID pandemic, and it's disrupting to parents and families as well.
Tesco has bought the Paperchase brand after the stationery chain fell into administration after over 50 years trading on the British High Street. However, the supermarket's deal for the business will not include taking over any of the retailer's 106 shops, leaving the future of over 800 jobs in doubt. Police forces have apologised to the relatives of victims of the Hillsborough disaster for what they described as profound failings. The apology comes in response to a report published in 2017 that looked into the experiences of the Hillsborough families. Police chiefs have promised a cultural change almost 34 years on from the disaster. 97 football fans lost their lives as a result of a crush at a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest in 1989. An inquest jury ruled in 2016 that supporters were unlawfully killed amid a number of police errors. Now, Lancashire police are searching for a missing woman, are appealing now for a potential key witness to come forward. 45-year-old Nicola Bully was last seen next to the reservoir on Friday. She was walking her dog. Police are now saying they're keen to find a man who was walking a small white fluffy dog in the area around the time Nicola disappeared. He's described as around 70 years old and 6 foot tall. The Ukrainian foreign minister says Ukraine will receive 120 to 140 Western tanks in the first wave of a series of deliveries from coalition partners from 12 countries. Meanwhile, footage has been released of Ukrainian soldiers being trained on how to use Leopard 2 battle tanks in Poland. They've been supplied by Germany to help support Ukraine in its ongoing war with Russia. It's expected to take up to 5 weeks before the crews are ready to use the vehicles in battle. The Princess of Wales says it's essential to know what's needed to help the future generation become happy, healthy adults. Launching her new early years campaign called Shaping Us, the Princess says she hopes to help people understand how early childhood affects later life and adulthood. Kensington Palace says the importance of early years development will be a key focus for Kate for the rest of her life. Vanity Fair royal editor and author Katie Nicholl says Kate's hoping her lifetime project becomes part of the national conversation.
I think it's significant that she's used her first sort of big moment as the Princess of Wales to launch this long-term campaign that is going to be screened in cinemas. You're going to see it on billboards. We're all going to be talking about this, she hopes, in the same way that we've all started talking about mental health.
On GB News, more news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Today marks 3 years since Brexit Day, and Boris Johnson has urged people to shrug off all this negativity and gloom-mongering about Brexit amid dire economic warnings on the 3rd anniversary of leaving the European Union. Those figures, though, have been quite selectively managed by some media outlets, actually, because if you do look at it, in 2022, the UK economy grew by 4.1% compared to the EU's 3.5%, but that somehow was lost in all of that gloom-mongering. We're going to take you back now to the initial wave of tub-thumping patriotic optimism, look at the reasons behind why Britain voted to leave the European Union, what people hoped Brexit would look like, and assess where they are today. How is the economy doing? Is it being battered by COVID still and the war in Ukraine? Those latest IMF figures I alluded to earlier, well, they're all about Britain in recession, but we'll be giving you some reasons to be optimistic. Taking full control of our laws was another top priority. Could pulling out of the ECHR help sort that out? And another thing, which is linked to the ECHR actually, is immigration. That was absolutely 100% a key driving factor behind the Brexit vote. Yet we're seeing record levels of both legal and illegal immigration. I happen to think that's a national disgrace, but there we go. Are there people living their post-Brexit lives full of regret? Would you change your mind if you were asked to vote again now? And what, crucially as well, is the state of the Union? Scotland, your Wales, your Northern Irelands of this world will be nipping over to all of those parts very, very shortly. But of course, we are nothing without you, the wonderful people. We are the People's Channel. So we'll be getting the viewers and listeners on the airwaves, getting yourselves on the telly. I want to talk about where you feel as though we're up to. But who better to kickstart this hour with? And speaking to the leader of Reform UK, it's Richard Tyes. Richard, thank you very much. Cheers for coming in, of course. Now, you obviously a massive, massive Brexiteer. A bit gutted about how it's turned out?
Not at all. I mean, we've got a fantastic platform of opportunity, Patrick, but unfortunately, this con-socialist Tory government has chosen not to take advantage. And wherever you look in terms of laws, money, borders, they've utterly failed. You touched on it just there, but they haven't controlled our borders. Either lawful immigration, which is at record highs, illegal immigration at record highs, and yet completely sortable with political will. They haven't cut taxes, they haven't cut VAT, they haven't cut environmental levies. And then on regulations, which possibly should be the easiest, they still haven't cut thousands and thousands of daft, absurd EU regulations that hinders growth. And so, look, it was the right decision. When I campaign, I'm just coming back from Hartlepool today, people don't regret the decision. What they regret is the utter failure to get going, get it sorted and make progress.
It's the implementation of it. Now, I am a little bit reluctant to just rely on, with a bit more belief and a bit more will, because it can sound quite wishy-washy. But actually, when it comes to Brexit, with a bit more belief and a bit more will, we could have really flown out the traps, couldn't we?
Look, it's about leadership and it's about conviction. And the bottom line is, elected politicians who they stood on a platform to get Brexit done, you've then got to drive it home. You've got to make sure your civil servants are going to do it. And if they're not going to do it, frankly, you've got to tell them to get out of the way and bring in people that will get it done. That's what leadership is all about. And that's where these Tory ministers have utterly failed the whole country, because they've allowed the civil servants to act as a massive blockage to this whole process.
Yeah, you said get the civil servants out the way. They're taking themselves out the way tomorrow. 100,000 of them on strike, supposedly.
Well, the country might run better,
I was going to say, it might be difficult to tell the difference.
Good day to get some laws scrapped.
Yeah, get it all in, exactly, yeah. So we'll be properly out by then. But just talk to me a little bit about, for example, the things that are going on in the Channel and, of course, legal immigration, net migration as well. What can Brexit Britain do now to sort out both of those issues?
Well, the whole point is that you want an immigration policy that works for us, that works for our economy, where we've got skill shortages. Until we train our own people, fine, you bring in immigration. We always have. We've always been a welcoming nation. But we've got to get 5 million Britons on out-of-work benefits back into work. So you've got to get higher net wages. That's absolutely critical. And look, Reform UK is the only party with a clear 6-point plan that will stop the boats. You've got to leave the ECHR. You've got to declare a national security threat. You've got to make it clear no one will stay here who comes here illegally. You've got to pick up and take back. All of this stuff you can do under existing laws and rules and regulations if you've got the political courage. They haven't, they won't. Only Reform UK will sort it out. And look,
would you turn the boats back?
Yes, I would pick them up and safely take them back to France, which you're allowed to do under existing laws, but they won't do. Look, focus on what works. It worked in Australia. It's still working on Australia. Copy what they do.
Yeah. Now, we had that famous quote from Michael Gove in the run-up to the referendum, didn't we? We've had enough of experts. Well, I actually, to be honest with you, unless you'll come back to bite me, I've had enough of experts, really, because we keep hearing from the IMF, who are persistently wrong about a lot of predictions that they have about how Britain is doomed. We're in recession, and they bury in the figures that the British economy grew 4.1% in 2022, which was faster, by the way, than the EU's at 3.5%, faster than the United States at 2%. Then they have the gall to tell us, well, you need to get off this high-tax, low-growth economy. We had a Prime Minister, look, she was flawed and the optics were terrible, the way that she went about her business, don't get me wrong, but we had Liz Truss, who wanted to go for growth.
She was the first person who started to talk about growth. I've been talking about growth for over a year. You can't tax you out of a crisis. You've got to grow you out of a crisis. That means you cut taxes for the least well-off, the lowest paid. Our plans will take 6 million people out of paying any income tax by lifting the threshold from 12.5 grand to 20 grand. That's 30 quid a week. You've got to cut daft regulations. You've got to encourage small businesses, the engine, the driver of our economy. You give them an incentive to take risks, to get out, to strive, to work hard during the week, at the weekends. That's how you drive an economy forward. But it all requires the right leadership and the right conditions. And this Conservative government, that's why I call them con-socialists.
Yeah.
You know, they're just like the red socialists.
I've got to ask you, though, when people say, and it is the easy line that people wheel out, and I had it wheeled out to me earlier on by a chap who literally was a party who wants to rejoin the EU, and they go, OK, what benefits has Britain seen from leaving the EU so far? We're years on from that vote.
Look, well, the first benefit we saw extraordinarily was the vaccine rollout, because we were able to buy vaccines and roll it out faster. And so literally Brexit saved lives within those first few months. That was remarkable. But what we haven't seen is the growth that would come from cutting taxes. We haven't seen higher net wages by controlling lawful immigration. We've basically got open borders in terms of our visa policy. And so look, all of that stuff these are deliberate political choices by this government that's betrayed Brexit. It's let us all down. And let's not forget, we need to save the Union with Northern Ireland, which has been completely sold down the river.
That's another one, actually. We haven't got time for you and I to talk about this now. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on, but actually that is a massive issue. Richard, thank you very, very much, as ever. Richard Tynesdale, leader of Reform UK. What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? Get your views coming in. As you always do, you never shine. That's why I love you. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But as we've been discussing, one of the key reasons people voted for Brexit was to take back control of our borders and our laws. But today, a leading legal commentator has told GB News he thinks it's unlikely the UK will pull out of a controversial human rights agreement, despite growing calls to ditch that treaty. Those in favour of withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights say it blocks key UK legislation, such as a more robust policy towards channel migrants. Basically, no flights to Rwanda have taken off, have they? Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, has been taking a look at what leaving the ECHR could mean.
In recent days, hundreds of people have arrived in UK waters on small boats, as Home Office officials quietly plan for the possibility that up to twice the 45,000 who crossed last year could come in the year ahead. That thought, deeply unpalatable for many, is fueling growing calls for the UK to withdraw from a human rights treaty that critics believe is hampering efforts to introduce a more assertive immigration policy. Introduced in the years after World War II, the European Convention on Human Rights was drawn up by the initial members of the then fledgling Council on Europe. It offered key protections to prevent those member governments abusing the fundamental rights of their people. But critics say there is no need for the UK to still be tied to such a treaty, that it's ludicrous judges in a European court can make rulings against British government policy post-Brexit. They cite the recent decision by the court in Strasbourg to block a Home Office flight bound for Rwanda as part of a deal struck with the African nation to process asylum seekers there.
He's absolutely right. Can I thank him for raising this? It's critically important.
But despite its many critics and indications by Justice Secretary Dominic Raab that he would be willing to consider it, seasoned legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg thinks it's highly unlikely the UK will ditch the treaty.
This doesn't seem remotely likely. It was something that Dominic Raab floated towards the end of last year. It's not been picked up by anybody else. It's certainly not part of the bill that's before Parliament, and that bill itself seems to be going nowhere. It was published last summer, but hasn't yet had its first main debate, its second reading debate, as it's called, in the House of Commons.
The ECHR's critics believe that British Bill of Rights legislation, still working its way through Parliament, could be turbocharged to take over from the European treaty. There's no doubt it would be complex, though, as the ECHR is woven into the very fabric of UK human rights laws. And there's another major issue at play here. Despite the imperative to deal more robustly with the likes of the small boat crisis, the government is proud of the UK's record on human rights. Pulling out of the treaty would be seen by many as a major blow to Britain's long-held position as a champion of human rights on the international stage. Ditching the ECHR would put the UK in the same club as the only other two European countries not signed up to the treaty, Belarus and Russia. Mark White, GB News.
OK, good stuff. Right, now with me are two GB News viewers. We've got Miranda Richardson and we've got Lee Webb. Great stuff, both of you. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show and have your voices heard. It's important. We need a bit more of this in the news, if you ask me. Lee, I'll start with you. We're focusing, as you're both aware, on the immigration side of things to start with. Lee, do you feel let down on immigration, both legal and illegal, in post-Brexit Britain?
The illegal immigration, yes, I feel very let down on that. And I think that's just the government not having a backbone and using the ECHR as a bit of an excuse. So Poland and Hungary, they're both in the ECHR. They're also in the EU, and they can actually manage their immigration policies pretty well. And you don't see loads of immigrants, illegal immigrants, going into them countries because of their policies. And we see that last year on the Belarusian border, where Polish troops were actually doing their job and keeping these people out. So there's no reason why that other people, that this country can't do it. It just requires a bit of backbone.
Well, and as indeed Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, made the point earlier on, and lots of our other viewers in my inbox have not been shy of pointing out as well, Miranda. We could just ignore the ECHR if we wanted to, and indeed a lot of other countries do quite a lot of the time. Miranda, your views on whether or not you feel like we've been let down on the immigration side of things post-Brexit?
I think, do you know what, it's always a very controversial issue, isn't it? Because on one hand, we can say we're let down and then we've got this going on. On the second hand, it's actually never been any different. You know, we've rumbled on with this for years and years. The bigger and the more technology that's developed and the more ways into countries are defined, more routes into the country are defined, the more it keeps on happening. So where do we draw the line on that subject? It will go on and continue to go on as long as people and we're an island and people move here. It's so straightforward.
Do you mind me asking, Miranda, I'll just stick with you before I go back to Lee. Miranda, do you mind me asking which way you voted in the EU referendum? Did you vote?
I did vote, yeah, and I voted to stay.
You voted to stay, and I'm assuming you would vote that way again, would you now?
I would, yeah, I would. You know,
do you feel vindicated in your view at the moment when you look around? A lot of Brexiteers feel as though we haven't had a proper Brexit, for example, and I think what they really mean by that, and I'm inclined to agree with them, by the way, I'm one of those people who doesn't think that we've had anything like the amount of benefits that we could have done if we'd have gone full throttle initially. But Miranda, do you feel justified at voting to stay now?
Yeah, I do. I think it's all very well saying going at full throttle. We never go into anything full throttle, do we? It's always a little bit half, a little bit toe in the water, maybe not. I know. That's what we do. But there are so many other effects that have come into play that people just didn't envisage. They really didn't. You know,
yes.
I work in hospitality. We lost an awful lot of staff straight off. Food prices in our industry have rocketed. And this is something that people just didn't think about. They thought, oh, no, it was great. Let's leave. Let's do it. Let's get out. No, it was going to have such a diverse effect across the board. Couple that with 2 years of some sort of pandemic, and it was a nightmare.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to be honest with you, though, Miranda, we can't just gloss over that, can we? Lee, just on that note, do you think if we'd have had Boris Johnson from the start, so forget the wilderness that was Theresa May's premiership, if we'd have gone... I'll use that word again, Miranda. Full throttle Boris. I nearly said full frontal Boris, but plenty of people have seen that if you read the papers. Full throttle Boris, Lee, at the start, do you think we would have got Brexit done better and quicker?
You know what? When Boris won that election and he made his speech outside 10 Downing Street, he gave us all hope that we were going to take advantage of being out of Brexit. And, OK, the pandemic came along. That's interrupted supply chains. So because that's interrupted supply chains, it hasn't actually been Brexit that's got the food lacking on the shelves. It's actually been COVID lockdown policy that's done that. But that's right across the world, and it's happening right across the world in Europe. You know, all of our economies aren't doing too good, and that's across the world in Europe as well, whether you're in the EU or not. So Brexit isn't to blame there. That's COVID. But I think what we need to be doing, the government needs to be doing now, taking advantage of a lot of advantages we can have. We haven't got to consult with 27 other countries when we make a trade deal, for instance. We haven't got to do that. That's a massive advantage in the world that we have. And we can actually get a lot of things done now. We don't have to abide by EU regulations, for instance.
And I think, Lee, we're too scared of offending people who, frankly, don't mind about offending us. I think we're too scared of what our friends in Germany and France and some of the other EU nations care about, and actually they don't give two hoops about mugging us off every now and again. Right, I've got to go though, guys. I could talk to you both all day, but I'm sure it won't be long until I talk to you again. I've got Miranda Richardson there, Lee Webb, two fantastic GB News viewers. You're with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, we're going to pick the bones out of the latest economic figures. Brexit Britain, woo!
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, welcome back. Now, the International Monetary Fund has forecasted that the UK will be the only major economy to shrink in 2023. The organisation predicted the UK would have the weakest performance among the G7 economies, but its forecasts have been known to be inaccurate in the past. Joining me now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Right, Liam. Now, all is not quite as it seems with these figures, is it?
No, they're forecasts, Patrick, and forecasts aren't destiny. I think it's worth saying that on these IMF figures out today, Britain actually grew among the fastest among the G7 economies, all the major economies in 2022, last year. Much faster than the EU average. We grew by 4.1%, much faster than the US. This year, though, as the IMF says, we're going to be hit by higher taxes. Other countries aren't raising their corporation tax, as we are in April, and also hit by higher energy costs for both firms and households, because we don't have that much gas storage. Our gas spot prices are higher. That translates into higher bills for all of us. So there are various reasons the UK is likely to grow a little bit slower, but I do think the IMF's over-egging this. I don't think the UK economy is going to shrink this year. The Bank of England said it would a few months ago. I said that would be far too gloomy. And I predict now on Thursday, when the Monetary Policy Committee announces its next interest rate move, I suspect the Governor of the Bank of England will be reining back on those previously gloomy forecasts that have clearly influenced the IMF forecast today.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, look, it plays into the hands, of course, on this particular day, 3 years since we properly left the EU. Properly, I'm using that term a bit loosely, but it plays into the hands of people who say that we should have remained, etc. But when you look at the EU's rate of growth in 2022, 3.5%, ours 4.1%, I mean, you could argue that we've done the right thing just in that year alone.
It's difficult to say. The economy is made up of so many different things. Look, 8% of our GDP is our exports to the European Union. It's by no means even the most definitive thing for the UK economy. What's been really definitive for the UK economy is that since we voted in June 2016. We spent 3 years arguing about Brexit. Then there was a transition period. You know, pretty much the month we came out of the transition period, left the single market and customs union proper, the COVID pandemic started. Since then, we've had war in Europe proper for the biggest war since 1945. So it's not exactly as if it's been, a normal period. And it's very difficult to ascertain what Brexit has actually done and hasn't done to the UK economy. As NAF management consultants might say, it's a journey, not an event, right? And it is a journey. We really don't know. And I think there's been lots and lots of claim and counterclaim today. But I would always say, as somebody who used to work at the IMF, remember always that both the IMF and the Treasury said in 2016 that simply by voting to leave would cause a huge downturn in the British economy that year. Well, it didn't. The British economy actually did very well for the rest of 2016 and into 2017, despite that Brexit vote.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned NAF management consultants there. We are where we are, of course, with a bit of blue sky thinking.
Let's run out the flagpole and see if anyone sleeps.
Run out the flagpole, bit of blue sky thinking, and we'll be away, mate. But no, absolutely. But yeah, when it comes to where we are, I suppose, yes, reasons to be optimistic. But I can't help but notice the IMF saying, well, Liz Truss, we're urging against her to do the tax cuts this quickly. And then now it's very much a case of, well, hang on a minute, maybe we're taxing people a bit too much. Are they trying to have it both ways?
I think there was obviously a problem when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did their mini-budget. They tried to do too much too soon. I think even the most sort of free market advocates of Trussonomics would acknowledge that, and indeed many of them have. Having said that, we are the only major economy that's going to raise corporation tax into a global economic slowdown. And now the IMF is saying that that's probably the wrong thing to do. In fact, I think financial markets are more worried that the British government's sort of overdoing the fiscal squeeze at the moment, rather than being profligate. So we've gone from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? I was just laughing because it's just,
That's economics for you.
You couldn't make it all good. There we go. Liam, thank you very much. Liam Malcolm, our economics and business editor, with yet another wonderful instalment of On the Money. Right, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. We've got a final flurry of Brexit chat as the UK departed the EU. Some Brexiteers hoped it might mark the start of the demise of the European Union. I wanted to have a look at the continent, OK, and not just go on holiday this time, but has anti-EU sentiment spread through member states like some thought it would? And we couldn't discuss Brexit without hearing from the man himself. That's right, OK. I hope he's got his Union Jack tie on. It's Mr Brexit, it's Nigel Farage, about whether or not his Brexit vision has been realised. Stay tuned for Full Throttle Farage. But first, here's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. The headlines from GB News. The Foreign Secretary says the UK's exit from the European Union has been tricky. James Cleverly was responding to a question in the House of Commons over the impact of Brexit. His comment comes a day after the Prime Minister said Britain was making huge strides since leaving the EU 3 years ago. That's despite a recent poll suggesting Britons are divided in their take on how Brexit has progressed, with 45% saying it's going worse than expected and 55% thinking it was about the same or better. Speaking to GB News, former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg said it was the right decision to leave the EU.
Bear in mind, though we left 3 years ago, we remained tied into European rules and regulations for a further 11 months. So it's only a little over 2 years. But in that 2 years, we have avoided nearly 8,000 new EU regulations, and we've saved taxpayers £191 billion purely and simply by not being signed up to the EU's post-COVID rescue programme. Even our fish are doing better. I saw there was a 63% increase in our catch of cod last year. So it's good for British fishermen, which we always promised Brexit would be.
Let's just bring you an update on the 45-year-old missing woman in Lancashire who was last seen on the River Wyre on Friday. Breaking news for you coming to us from Lancashire Police, who say they found the key witness that they were asking to come forward in the search for Nicola Bulley. She went missing while she was walking her dog. Her dog was found running around near a park bench where they also found her mobile phone. Updates from Lancashire Police coming through to us all the time. We'll keep you up to date on that one. Now, tens of thousands more teachers have joined the UK's largest education union to take part in strikes tomorrow. The National Education Union says 40,000 school staff signed up in a fortnight. Tomorrow is the first of 7 days of strikes by the union in February and March amid a dispute over pay. Those are your latest news headlines from the GB Newsroom. You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Back in a moment.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, ladies and gents, you've got just about 10 minutes or so until the man himself, Nigel Farage, joins us live here on GB News. But as we've been discussing throughout the show today, OK, it marks 3 years since the UK's exit from the EU. Some Brexiteers thought, and indeed hoped, that the UK's departure might be the start of a sort of domino effect collapse of the EU, with Euroscepticism coursing through the veins of various different member states. But has anti-EU sentiment been realised? And has the UK actually paved the way for other countries to leave? Joining me now is Marco Vincenzino, geopolitical analyst. Marco, thank you very much. What is the state of play in the European Union when it comes to Euroscepticism dotted around various different pockets of it?
Listen, the scepticism existed before Brexit. It'll continue to exist after Brexit. However, the main question is what level of popular support does it have? And I think in this terms, it will ebb and flow largely over time, and that's largely dependent upon factors at any given point in time, usually political, economic, security. And I think right now the factors that are driving much of the debate in terms of movements that are Eurosceptic will be things such as the immigration crisis, the post-COVID fallout, economic fallout. You're also going to have the fallout of the Ukraine war, and primarily an energy crisis. So you see a lot of this playing. It depends what period, a given time. And you have certain countries where it's maybe stronger than others. You look at particularly in places like Hungary, Poland, and different other areas that, once again, it's driven by the debate. What is concerning the European Union and the different nation states at that given point in time?
I mean, I'm actually, to be honest with you, amazed that there isn't more overt Euroscepticism on the continent. When you look at some of the leaders, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, who didn't exactly cover herself in glory as Germany's defence secretary, did she? That she made them train with broom handles instead of guns. I mean, give that woman a job, for goodness sake. She can't manage a German army, but she can run a continent, supposedly, Marco.
Yeah, I mean, many people, even at the highest level of the European Union, are often, appointed by consensus, and you're not going to always get the most qualified people. But I think in this sense, what's driving a lot of, I don't say unity in Europe, but much of it has to do with the fear of the fallout of the Ukrainian war, is that security. There's a lot of anxiety in Europe. There's massive war, the worst war on the European continent taking place after the Second World War. So I think that's driving much, if you can say that it's weakened to a certain extent, the level of skepticism, and has to do a lot of that. But it's withered away. And over time, once again, it'll be driven by different factors. It depends on that given point of time. So I think it's fear and anxiety at the present time. And then another important thing is money. The European recovery package, a lot of countries are in a state of crisis economically, and Brussels is giving a lot of money. So, for example, if you take Italy, the current Italian prime minister was very much critical of the European Union before taking power in late 2022, but yet she's created a very pragmatic relationship with the European Union, and much of that has to do with the fact that Italy is going to be the largest recipient of European recovery post-COVID.
Money talks, Marco. Money talks. Look, Marco, thank you very much. Bit short and sweet, this one, but always a pleasure, my good man. Marco Vincenzino, their geopolitical analyst. Now, look, Emmanuel Macron rather famously said that he wasn't going to give the French a vote when it comes to leaving the European Union because he thinks they'd vote to leave. So there you go. That's democracy, isn't it? But arguably the most French man that we've ever had on this channel now, Charles-Henri Gaulois, leader of France's Generation Frexit group, joins me now. Great to have you back on the show. What are the chances of France leaving the EU, following the British footsteps?
No, I mean, the British vote paved the way because in France and many European countries, they said it's not possible to leave the European Union. And actually, the UK has shown to the whole Europe that it's possible to leave the UK. So now many of us across the continent are working to leave the undemocratic European Union. Let's say you were talking shortly before about the state of mind in France and in other European countries. Let's say that so far it's quite difficult because they are using Ukraine war. They are telling that the European Union is protecting the continent from war, which is totally false because, as you know, and even as Nigel Farage has said, let's say that the European Union and NATO expansionism has fueled this Ukraine war
exactly.
conflict.
And sorry to cut across you there, but it's another important point, which I do think that if Britain itself as well hadn't responded in the way that it initially did, then Europe might not have actually been protected from war. So you can look at it both those ways, can't you? European Union expansion might have caused a bit of what we're seeing in Ukraine at the minute, as well as NATO. But also, if Britain hadn't have got involved early doors and sent actual weapons as opposed to what Germany sending some probably rainbow-coloured helmets, then, we might be in a different situation anyway. Is the sense on the continent, though, that they want to do everything they can to punish Britain for leaving?
Sure, or let's say they will try to do it, but they are doing it like with the mainstream media. As I told, British paved the way of leaving the European Union, but now they are using every single, let's say, bad fact in the UK to blame Brexit. It's totally ridiculous because, of course, the UK is currently suffering economically, but let's be realistic, it's quite the same across the continent, and it has nothing to do with Brexit. What the UK is currently suffering because you have a weak leader with Rishi Sunak, but because many of what British is suffering so far It was before the Brexit. Let's say you are suffering for your electric mix based on the gas, so you suffer for the sanction towards Russia on the skyrocketing gas price. It has nothing to do with Brexit. It was there before Brexit. You are as well suffering, let's say, inflation because of the conflict and because the Bank of England, as the European Central Bank, has printed a lot of money. So it was before. It has nothing to do with Brexit. But let's say that the current problems that you have in the UK, it's not linked with Brexit. It was there before. And if you were in the EU, you would have exactly the same issue.
Well, exactly. And you mentioned inflation. Another one, according to Suella Braverman as well, could be invasion, given what we've been seeing going on in the Channel as well. And yet again, that things wouldn't be any better there if we were a member of the European Union, would they? Look, thank you very much. Again, I'm sorry it's short and sweet, but we always have to rattle through it at the end of this show. Charles-Henri Gallois there, leader of France's Generation Frexit group, and that is the extent of my ability to pronounce French, ladies and gentlemen, so you are very welcome. I have just got back from France myself, a little holiday, and of course, I too, like a lot of people coming across the Channel, was very glad to escape that war-torn nation. Not. Let's go to Mr. Brexit himself. With me now is GB News presenter Nigel Farage. Nigel, great stuff. Now, 3 years to the day since we actually officially, quotes unquote, left the European Union. How's it going for you?
Well, remember what a big night it was, because we've been through over 3 years of almost the entirety of the British establishment trying to reverse the result. They didn't accept the fact we voted to leave. We were all knuckle-dragging morons. So the fact we actually, in the end, got it over the line was a major achievement. And there are things that we've done in foreign policy, such as signing the AUKUS Pact, things like that, taking leadership on Ukraine, whether you agree with the position or not, things that we've done that we couldn't have done as EU members. But for domestic policy, for economic policy, and in terms of borders, I feel like on the 31st of January 2020, we moved house to a great big exciting new house with lots of new rooms, and most of the packing boxes are still there, untouched. So many of the things we could have done, quite radical things, from fisheries through to financial services, we just haven't done. And some say, well, look, it was the pandemic that got in the way. But you know what? Truth of it is, the Conservative Party never really believed in it. They haven't pursued it with the vigour that they ought to. And they've left the ground open for a Labour government to take us much closer back towards the single market. So overall, got to be honest, delighted we left. It was the right thing, but I am a little disappointed.
Yes, indeed. And Nigel, just on that, we're looking at various different stats that appeared to show quite a lot of a horrible phrase I'm going to use now, regret, which makes you feel a bit sick saying it. But I can't help but wonder whether or not this was part of the plan all along. From those very people who never wanted us to leave in the first place, they thought, OK, if we make enough of a Horlicks out of this, eventually those, as you call them, knuckle-dragging morons will come to their senses and we'll find ourselves back in the massive globalist putsch that is the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, if I was asked by a poll tomorrow, am I disappointed by Brexit, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
So I'd be included in one of those people. It doesn't mean, though, I want it reversed. Doesn't mean I think it was the wrong thing to do. So it's all about differing shades of opinion. Politically, of course, the status quo has been reversed. We've left. The problem is we're not diverging quickly enough from it. Now, some Conservative MPs will tell you, well, right at the moment, you know, we're in the middle of a piece of legislation that will get rid of a lot of EU laws. Others will say, in the course of the last 2 years, there are EU laws we haven't signed up to. All of that's true, but you go and ask 5.5 million men and women running small businesses what regulatory benefits they've seen from Brexit, and thus far the answer is zero. We haven't made the most of it because the government hasn't truly believed in it.
Nigel, thank you very much, as ever. You're on later as well, aren't you? Do you want to give us a quick heads up of what's on the agenda?
Well, of course, we're going to be debating Brexit, but also the IMF. Not exactly our friends. And you know what? Actually, for most of the last 5 years, we have been growing more quickly than the rest of the G7. Why the big downturn? And just how much is Jeremy Hunt getting wrong?
Yeah, all right, could be a long show, that. Nigel, thank you very much. Nigel Farage there. It'll be on your screens a little bit later on this evening, won't he? 7 till 8. Right, now, I want to look at whether there's feelings of this horrible word. Please, let's try not to make this a thing, ladies and gentlemen. Regret. I know, grab the sit buckets. But that is, yes, it's got in my auto cue here, that's Brexit regret. Yeah, I think the nation grasped that. But anyway, on its 3rd anniversary, with me now is Dr Charles Sannock, former MEP and NHS consultant, who believes that the decision to leave the EU was a mistake. Why?
Well, clearly it was a mistake. It's cost the British economy 4% of our GDP, approximately, 100 billion a year. Young people who no longer have the right to move freely around Europe and seek work. People like of my generation can't retire so easily on the European continent. Right. And we've had a 15% hit to our trade with the European Union. And we haven't been able to create all these marvellous free trade agreements with the rest of the world that were promised. So Brexit's been a huge con. It was a lie from the beginning, and we're still having to live this lie. I'm afraid both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party still claim it's going to work. It's not going to work because it's just quite obvious. It was always fabrication.
Just when it comes to a few of the points that you've made there, OK, I mean, the fact is that actually, if you really do look at these stats, it's much better to be in Britain in the last year than it has been to be in the EU. Economy's grown 4.1% compared to the EU's 3.5%. Young people do have the right to live and work abroad. It's just under a different system, OK? So there is all of that. You can still retire on the continent if you so wish. It is just under a different system, isn't it? So are you actually just still a bit hurt that you lost?
No, not at all. I mean, that just isn't true. Freedom of movement has gone completely. You can retire abroad if you're rich. You can't just go and live abroad easily if you're an old age pensioner. You need to get all sorts of permissions. I live in the European Union. I'm living in Brexit in Eastern Europe. I know only too well how complicated it is now for a Brit to come and live or work in the country that I reside in. So I'm not particularly sore that I lost. I will carry on fighting to expose the lies and the false promises which were made, I'm afraid, 3, 4, 5 years ago by the likes of Nigel Farage. And the idea that Brexit has got nothing to do with our economic woes just isn't true. It's clearly problematic for British exporters to export their goods to the single market.
Look, and some people would argue that's because we've not taken full opportunity that was out there. Of course, I will hark back to those figures again, that we have grown quicker than the rate of the European Union and indeed the United States of America. Can I ask you what is so appealing about living in an unelected European Commission? Ursula von der Leyen did an absolutely cack-handed job of being Defence Secretary in Germany. She made them train with broom handles. Now she's in charge of a continent. But, of course, you didn't get to vote on that, did you? Is that better than what we've got here in the UK now?
It's also not true, because the European Commission is actually voted on by the MEPs, and I voted on them when I was an MEP for 20 years, as did Nigel Farage.
Yeah, but hang on a second. How many millions of people live in the European Union, and they do not get to choose who ultimately is in charge of them? What you've just said there is the kind of argument that someone might make for the Chinese Communist Party.
No, not at all, because once again, European Union legislation is made by directly elected MEPs, and I was one of them for 20 years, and the Council of Ministers, who are elected ministers from the national member state governments. They're all elected. The Commission doesn't make legislation.
But the people... OK, so if we just had a situation a bit like what we've got at the minute, actually, in the UK at the moment, where our Prime Minister was not voted for by the British public, but was just chosen by people in Westminster, you think that would be OK, do you? Because that's what you're advocating for.
I'm sorry, the British Prime Minister's not directly voted on by the British public. He's voted on by the members of Parliament.
Parliamentary majority, yeah, exactly, or a presidential system in America, for example.
In the same way that the members of the European Parliament voted for the President of the European Commission. It's a very directly analogous process. Nobody voted for Rishi Sunak. In fact, he wasn't even leader of the party when we had the last general election.
Look, I dare say what you're doing now is what a lot of people do when they're on the ropes, and you're not actually really making much sense, are you? You clearly know what I'm talking about. The people of the European Union do not get to vote for the people who are right at the top of the European Commission. But, of course, it's democracy, I suppose. On your terms, you would say, Dr. Charles?
I found my stay in the European Union as an MEP. In many ways, there were more checks and balances and more democracy than we actually see in an elective dictatorship where you have a 80-seat majority in the House of Commons where you can do more or less what you want. The European Union has checks and balances and democratic scrutiny and oversight by the European Parliament of the Commission. And of course, they have been thrown out as they were under Jacques Santer. So the idea that the EU is not democratic just doesn't stack, I'm afraid.
OK, all right. Well, unfortunately, I don't have time to keep arguing with you because it's the end of the show, although I would absolutely love to have done. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. You take care. Right, unfortunately, I'm sorry about that. I haven't got time to go to Michelle and tell her what's coming up, but I'm sure it'll be great. She's over there now. I can see her, so it'll be fantastic. I've been Patrick Christys. I'll be back again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Take it easy, people.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Increasingly windy for many of us through the rest of the day, but particularly in the north where there are also blustery showers. Clear spells in the south. We've seen a cold front move through here as a weakening feature. Now that cloud is clearing, sunshine is returning across England and Wales. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, tightly packed isobars, a northwesterly breeze bringing chilly air and frequent showers. Now those showers are falling as snow above 400 or 500 metres over central Scotland. But it's the wind that is the main concern as we head into the night time, with gales widely across northern Scotland and for some exposed coasts of northern Scotland, especially around Orkney, Lewis, the North Mainland, 60, 70, perhaps 80 mile per hour in places. That could cause disruption. And it's going to be a cold night, 3 or 4 Celsius in the north, 5 to 7 further south. Although in the south, it'll be a bright start to Wednesday, having been, well, a mixture of clear spells and cloud overnight. Some sunshine, the best of which will be in the south, remaining into the afternoon. Also brightening up in the north of Scotland, the wind and the showery activity easing in between an area of cloud and some outbreaks of rain for Northern Ireland, west and southwest Scotland and northern England. A chilly day again in the north, 7 or 8 Celsius, further south 9 to 11 degrees, but the wind becoming less of an issue later Wednesday, that wind tending to become lighter. Although it will turn wetter once again across the northern half of the UK, some steady rain into Scotland and northern England overnight. Northern Ireland seeing a lot of cloud and a few spots of rain. Clouds thickening further south as well, and so a frost-free night for the vast majority, although a touch of frost is possible in the far north ahead of the rain.